Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Knife. Whoa, I almost said the Knife Talk podcast. Wrong podcast. Of the Artisans of Steel podcast. I have an incredible guest today, a woman who I have admired for quite a long time. She's spectacular in all dimensions, in aspects of her making, and I'm really excited to get to know her a lot better through this conversation and to share that with you guys. But before we get into that, we're going to start by talking about our super sponsors from the Patreon. So if you want to be part of this conversation, either by checking it out live and asking these talented makers questions directly, either through the live chat or through the Patreon, that we can talk about here. You can join the Patreon at either the illuminated individual level or at the super sponsor level. And at the super sponsor level, you get to become part of the introduction to these conversations. And so, again, so go over to patreon.com, look up Malmasi Fire Arts, and you can do all the things that need to be done to make that happen. All right. Josh A. Weston is the first one. So Josh Weston is a knife maker. He's a very talented, creative guy based out of Michigan. He works with a group of other makers who call themselves the Dragon Forge Experience. They're on Instagram at Dragon Forge EXP. They're actually fabricating another new dragon. I think currently they have, 6 or so dragons, and I'm guessing they must be working on at least another couple, but this one that they're working on right now is absolutely beautiful. So they fabricate these forges that look like dragons, and then at these Renaissance festivals that they take these dragons around to across the country, down in Arizona and on the East Coast and all over. People get the opportunity to forge out of these things, and forge for the first time, but out of these forges that look like dragons. And I really want to take my son to that because he is an absolute I don't know if dragophile is a is a real term, but he is a lover of, or maybe it'd be dracophile, but he loves dragons. And so go check out Josh. He's a great dude. He's also a super talented artist. He's on Instagram, again, at Dragon Forge EXP. That's for the Dragon Forge Experience, as well as his personal maker page is Josh A. Weston on Instagram. All right, next up, we have Russell Tinsley. He is Ouzel Finch Beers. His maker page is Can't Make Knives, although he has been taking classes and he's been developing skills and working with other makers. He's becoming a good knife maker, so he's gonna have to change that moniker somewhere down the road, although it is pretty catchy. I like it. But he is also the owner and operator of Ouzel Finch Beers. Ouzel Finch Beers is based out of Virginia. And I keep forgetting to look up the exact fort that they're based out of, but you can find it online just by looking up Ouzel Finch, which is spelled Oozle, Finch Beers. And they are based in an old fort. That's where their tap room is. That's where their brewery is. And they have all kinds of events coming up. And actually, their 8-year anniversary is coming up. I just had it pulled up, but these guys, they make all kinds of wild and crazy delicious beers that are way outside the box, like flavor combinations you never would have thought of before. And lately, they do a lot of kind of what they've been calling boozy sodas. And so any kind of soda pop that you would have drank as a little kid, whether it was like a Crush or Fanta or whatever, they've kind of made a grown-up version of that that's a boozy soda. But again, they have all kinds of other sour beers, and saisons, and also just all these other crazy dessert beers that you should check out. Go to your local beer market. If they don't already carry the Ouzel Finch, talk to the buyer about getting it in. It's going to be worth it. They're not going to have a problem selling it. The labeling is also very good, so that also helped, at least for me, when it comes to picking a beer. Labeling is a big game changer for me. So go check them out at Ouzel Finch Beers on Instagram. All right, next up is Dan Hubbs. Dan Hubbs is a good guy. He's on Instagram at 66 Mountain Knives. I finally made the connection with the numbers 66. I always thought it was 66, but I think it's because he's 6'6". He is an absolute giant. He's a great guy, though. He's doing wonderful work. I was excited to see him at Blade Show this last year. He's doing continuing to do great work. He's making awesome mosaics that you can go find on his Instagram. He's worth a follow. Again, he's kind of a newer maker. He just finished out a chef's knife that has this kind of almost kind of a what is it, like a wrought iron ship chain kind of look to it. So it's got like the ovals through the middle, and then one like the cross piece that goes through the middle, or sorry, the ovals, and then the cross piece through the middle, and they link together and they go down, they repeat down the plate. Looks really cool. And I think it's actually a combination of a couple different patterns. So it also has somewhat of a weaving effect to it. But go follow Dan. He's a great guy. And he's just continuing to learn and grow as a maker, and it's great to watch. Again, he's on Instagram and Facebook at 66 Mountain Knives. Next up, we have Lawrence Lake. He's Maritime Knife Supply. He's on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Maritime Knife Supply. They actually just finished up, I believe, the Atlantic. The Atlantic. Oh no. the oh gosh, the something lakes, the Great Lakes Custom Knife Show. Gosh, I don't know why I couldn't get that out. Great Lakes Custom Knife Show up in Canada. I hope it was an awesome event. I saw a lot of great pictures from the event. He was one of the sponsors because he's a maker getting into the industry now over the last few years now. He built up Maritime Knife Supply because he wanted to be able to get the supplies he needed himself as a maker, and also help other makers get knife supplies at a reasonable price. He doesn't do any kind of discounts or anything because he just keeps the profit margin basically as low as possible, just so he's getting the stuff in and he's getting it to you for as inexpensively as possible. So go check him out. He's Maritime Knife Supply on Instagram. Again, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, and maritimeknifesupply.com to get basically anything you need knife making wise, from handle pins, handle scales, anvils, grinders, all kinds of stuff, everything in between that you need for making your knives. All right, next up we have Gabe Fletcher of Anchorage Brewing. He's Anchorage Brewing. He's the owner and operator and head brewer of Anchorage Brewing. He is also at Anchorage Forge on Instagram, which is his maker page. He's a very talented guy who comes from a background of course, brewing. But even before that, he's done all kinds of things. And all of that background skills kind of really parlayed very nicely into his knife making and forging. And if you go follow him on Anchorage Forge, he's doing a lot of really great work. I've been fortunate to become part of his journey. I've gone up and taught with him a couple times, and he has really taken that ball and ran with it and done some really excellent work. Especially in his chef's knife making and grinding and his mosaic Damascus patterns that he's coming up with. And he's got this giant Chinese cleaver that he just worked on or finished up. He's going to be bringing down for a show down here in Washington, actually. But it's got this beautiful pattern that incorporates jelly rolls with other mosaic, and it's tiled down the blade, and just like the way it all comes together and flows is really, really nice. You got to go check it out on his Instagram, on his maker page at Anchorage Forge to see more of that. All right, next we have Tony Sasma. He's TNT Forge on Instagram. He's a great guy that we're super psyched to have back as part of the Patreon. Is one of the super sponsors. He's been a knife maker for many years, and he's also starting to do more woodworking as well to kind of like, honestly, for me, it's nice to mix things up. So I've been doing a lot of teaching on top of my knife making. So he's doing woodworking in conjunction with his knife making. And he's making these beautiful butcher blocks and cutting boards that have all this very complex geometric kind of activity going on in the woodworking. And so you should go check him out and get one of those from him and give him some support, because he's a great guy and he's doing very good work. Again, he's Tony Sesma at TNT Forge on Instagram. Finally, we have Eric Kidwell. He is at District 202 LLC. He's based out of Maryland, and I'm excited, or I've been so thankful for him to be part of the sponsors and podcast. He's gonna step away for a while, but I just want to say a massive thank you to him for his continued support for quite a while now. and as well as his support of the knife making community. He is you often can find him down at the Travis Words Hammer-In that is happening usually every March, early to mid-March. And he is just constantly running around. He's been doing it for, God, I think 12 years now, where he is kind of the point man for finding whatever it is you might need, especially if you're there as a presenter, but also just for attendees, anything they might need to find and figure out. He's the camera. He's running around, usually wrapped up in a bunch of cables and cords with a camera, because he's trying to help get in and get a secondary view of the different presentations that are going on. Because often when somebody's doing a grinding demonstration and they're standing at the grinder, you can't, if you're just standing around them, you can't really see what's going on. So he has a camera and is projecting to a television, and you can see what he has going, or what whoever the person is doing the detailed work. You can see it up close and personal, the same way the knife maker is seeing it. And so he's just always been a great guy and a great supporter of this podcast, this Patreon, and the knife community at large. And I just want to give him a big thank you. Go give him a follow. He's gonna keep working on his knife making journey. He's got his shop is almost put together, and he's going to start hitting the ground running. He's got such a depth and background of information from all those hammer-ins that he's done all this video for the past. He still has all that information. So I hope he works out some sort of arrangement with Travis Words to start their own Patreon where they can put up all these different presentations that they've taken the video for over the years, because there's just tons of it out there. So that would make a huge impact on knife makers and their ability to make great knives. So, okay, let's get on to the meat of the show. Grace Horne is the guest today. Again, she is an extremely talented and multifaceted maker that I've been following, I don't even know, probably for most of my career. And I think I was first introduced to her work maybe by the DeRosiers, after I think they went to the Paris show of quite a few years back. And I was like, who's this lady? And I started seeing the scissors that she was making, the knives she was making, and it just like boggled my mind that I never even thought about the idea that scissors could be something that a custom knife maker or a cutler could be making. And it totally was just a no duh all of a sudden. But then I started to see all of the artwork that she would also do in the planning, and we have pictures and examples of that here. But I keep a journal and it's very small, but she is just so intense and elaborate about it. It's amazing to see. I'm going to pull her in right now. Grace Horne, thank you so much for being part of the conversation today. I'm really excited to chat with you and get to know you better.
Well, this is exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's good. I think it's going to be good. And yeah, I really have admired your work and followed it. And I feel like I don't yet, I think I still wouldn't benefit from taking a class from you, but you've done such an amazing job putting out so much information, or putting so much information out there and showing your process of the or your scissor making process, especially, though you also make fixed blades and folders, and you're also a corseter.
Yeah, corseteer.
Making corsets, and other kind of like clothing and apparel, shoes. Yeah. So all kinds of stuff. It's amazing. And I really want to learn. I have a kind of an idea, a project coming up somewhere down the line, but I would like to do what that incorporates scissor making, because it is essentially replicating a pair of vintage cooking shears. They're poultry shears. I think they're from the 50s. They were my wife's grandmother's poultry shears. And they're actually a really nice design that I don't really see around anymore. A lot of poultry shears are very simple these days.
Yeah.
Probably for the ease of manufacture more than anything, but I really like these ones and I would love to replicate them. But I'm just yammering now because I think I'm a little bit nervous actually to talk to you, even though I've seen you at
We've known
Blade
each
Show
other for
multiple times.
years.
I know.
Yeah.
I always try to get over and say hi and see your work, and we
Mm.
chat a bit and catch up some. But I feel like this is a little more like usually that's in an audience, like in a crowd of thousands of people, and now it's just you and me.
Yeah, really, like, you need to either have a table back to back with somebody
Right.
or kind of end up in a situation where you can really spend some time. Otherwise, you know people, but you don't get the opportunity to really speak to them, do you?
Right.
You can
Get
see
to in
people
depth.
for years and years and
Yeah.
not get that opportunity.
Yeah. I think even since my first Blade Show, which was in 2015,
Mm,
I was trying to, I think I missed, I don't think caught you that year, but I think it was the following year that I was like, I got to get over there. Um, because for whatever reason, I mean, and a lot of makers, I think, have a hard time, especially when they're first getting to the shows, getting away from the table and seeing
mm,
stuff. And so the second year I was there, I made it a very clear point to not only get away from the table, but to come over and see you and see
mm.
your work. And so it's been really awesome to follow and get to know you more.
Yeah, I've got to know a whole load of people who I knew from sight by doing these classes, as making classes, and then
Right.
suddenly I've kind of ended up being really good friends with people who I've known in passing for years. And
Sure.
it's like,
Well,
why didn't we have a beer together before now? Well, it's always
well,
the way, isn't it?
and I think we're both coming off teaching adventures. You, particularly, you were out at the Pacific Knife Makers
S-
invitation, or
Pacific Northwest Custom Invitational.
okay, sorry,
There
there
you
you go,
go.
you nailed it. Um, so after that, you then did some
I've
adventuring,
been away for a
exploring, and
month.
then yeah,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
I think you
pretty
finished
full
up.
on.
So yeah, talk to us about where we're catching you. You're just getting back basically home,
Mm. Yep.
and where we're finding you, what's been going on recently, and then we can kind of get back into
Mm.
some of the normal conversation.
Yeah.
Your origin story.
So this last trip has
Yeah.
been great actually because I got the opportunity to go and do that show in
Hmm.
Seaside, and I was invited over, and it's just a one-day show, and
Right.
I kind of it's a long trek to go for for just one day,
Yeah.
um, but actually, so what I decided to do was then run a 3-day basic scissor making class in Portland
Oh, you
after
did.
that.
Right.
In Bill Touch's workshop,
Yeah.
which was great. That was really good. So I had 8 knife makers, and I just opened it up to the other exhibitors at the show and said, if anybody wants to stay for an extra few days and do scissor making, that
Yeah.
was great. So I had like Luke Swenson,
Okay.
um, and that was cool. I got to hang out with him in Texas a few years ago,
Okay.
so it's not like we didn't know each other. And then there were some other guys. Just a whole really interesting and diverse group of people,
Sure.
like right from people who would normally just do CNC
Hmm.
and who were there and who were, because I'm so traditional in my approach, I very
Right.
much encourage people to file everything. I
Yeah.
mean, I will let them go on the grinder, but really, and they're kind of like, okay, this is a file. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
file. Um, and then after that, I went up to Ephrata,
Right.
Washington State,
Yeah.
hung out with my friend Ed Shemp, and um, that was cool. I did a little class up there,
Yeah.
just for 3 people. That was fine.
Wonderful.
Bob
Yeah.
Kramer came,
Excellent. Oh,
which
cool.
was cool.
Sure. Yeah.
Which was ironic because I'd actually gone through Seattle, and it would have been much closer for me to have called by and said hello to him while I was in Seattle.
Right.
But
Because he's
it
only
was
maybe another hour and a half north.
yeah, but it was an
2 hours.
excellent
Yeah.
excuse for him to come out and visit with Ed,
Yeah.
so that was cool. Then had a week off where I actually got to stay with a friend and not live out of a suitcase for a week, which was
Sure.
cool.
Yeah.
And then I flew over to Portland, Maine,
Okay.
and went up to the New England School of Metalwork. it was the most nerve-wracking travel arrangements in the world, because I was
Okay.
flying into one Portland and flying out of the other Portland.
Oh, yeah, I guess
And
so.
the sort of thing that would wake me up in the middle of the night is, have I booked a hotel in the correct city on the correct time?
Right.
And in fact, I had a terrible overlay when they cancelled my flight from Philadelphia to Portland.
Oh,
And I knew I had to book a hotel, like, really quickly whilst
yeah.
waiting on the runway. And I thought, oh, that's a really cheap hotel. Was just about to press go, and then went, oh, how far away is that from the airport? And looked at it and went, no, that was the other
Oh my
Portland.
god.
Oh
It's on
no.
the other side of the country.
Yeah, not helpful at all.
Yeah. Oh my
But
gosh.
everything worked out well in the
Yeah.
end. And then, yeah, so I did the last batch of teaching was last week, up with Derek at the New England School of Metalwork, which was lovely.
Yeah.
I taught there last October.
Yeah.
And my life went a little bit upside down at that point.
Okay.
And I actually had to cancel the second week. So when I found
Sure.
out that I was bringing everything back online at the beginning of the year, I sent a message to Derek and said, could you see if you could kind of slot me in for a week's teaching and
Right.
get all those people who I had to cancel last year,
Yeah.
see if they're free for that? Because I felt really guilty about
Sure.
cancelling them at short notice, but it just that's the way it was. So
Such is life. Yeah.
mm,
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That sounds like quite a whirlwind, especially doing the Portland to Portland. But I've been to that school of New England, or a school in New England, the
yeah.
metalwork school, and it's a very unique and cool environment, and I like that they have the students, or offer for the students to stay basically
Mhm.
right there at the
Mm.
school, and I didn't really ever think about the benefit of that until you end the class, and then everybody still stays together, and the class kind of continues, but in a much more casual manner, an
Oh,
informal
no,
manner.
not on my courses.
Not in
No,
yours. Okay.
no,
Okay.
no. So we do 8 till 5. I give
Sure.
them an hour off for lunch so we can all go and have fried scallops.
Yeah.
Oh, don't even talk about how much weight I've put on over the last month. Fried scallops for lunch, and then we continue for the rest of the day, and then at 5 o'clock we stop, and I give them an hour lecture.
Oh,
And
wow.
then I know. Well, you can have a cup of tea or an
Yeah.
adult beverage at that point.
Interesting.
And then after 6 o'clock, we can then go back into the workshop.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
And then
Oh my
we're finishing about 8 o'clock at night. It's pretty full on. But
wow. That sounds great, though.
yeah, really, I love these residential
Yeah.
courses. So I teach at the local university here in Sheffield,
Okay.
and it's just undergraduate metalwork and jewellery students. And there's something so restorative
Mm.
about teaching these classes as opposed to teaching undergraduates. It's just not the same at all.
Okay.
You know, that idea that this group of people have come together and they are so hungry for information, and that they are, and they're a captive audience for me. So,
Right.
you know, and I do love to give people as much information as possible. So yeah,
I
there's a real energy and
I'm right there with you.
sense of community when you have. I love it. You know, particularly as you then eat together, and yeah,
Mhm.
it's just great.
Okay. That
Mm.
makes sense. I totally get that. I guess I'll say for my class, yeah, it was fun. It's just at meals and afterwards,
Mm.
there's still, because everybody's there, you just
Yeah,
kind of
I know.
continue the conversation and ask questions and stuff. It's kind of like going off to camp in a way,
Mm.
especially if it's a place where you stay at the school, like the New England School of Metalwork. I think the Center for Metal Arts does that as well, where the students stay very close to the school, and so they become just like a little tight knit group or clan or tribe in that time while they're at the class.
Yeah, I think even if, in fact, I would probably not recommend that people go back into the workshop after 6 o'clock. I just think that's not. But then people are so hungry to do it, you
Right.
know. That I wouldn't recommend that. But I do think that the casual conversation that happens in a group of like-minded people
Yeah.
is by far the most important part of that. And
Right.
that's where collaborations start, that's where friendships start, that's where,
Absolutely.
a lot of things happen that I know I'm not gonna say I'm gonna say it. That's when networking happens.
Sure.
And previously I would find that term abhorrent because it just feels like it's a manufactured thing and not something that was into at all.
Well, and
Um
it also has like this um air of like self-serving selfishness to it, I feel
Yeah.
like as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But that is truly the proper way of how networking should happen
Should
rather than
happen. Yeah.
rather than artificially over, I don't know, brunch and random
Right.
people getting together.
Right.
Yeah.
And name
That doesn't
dropping and
appeal to me. Yeah.
flexing about the things they've done or the things they've made and the people they know and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I think it is the proper way to try to for people to uh, network and connect in a more meaningful way for sure.
And also, I don't think it's something that you can rush.
Right.
I think that it, half an hour meeting somebody, that doesn't cut it really. That kind
Mm,
of like you have one conversation and you find that you get on okay, and then you try a slightly trickier situation, and then you might
right.
show somebody your project that you're not entirely sure about.
Right.
Uh, you can't do that in half an hour or
Right.
10 minutes or, whatever you're meant to do in these
Right.
networking things.
Absolutely. I
Horrible idea.
yeah, well, and that's what I really enjoy about like I said, I'm coming off of a not as long of a trip, but
Mm,
4-day trip to Minnesota where I went to the Midwest Knife Makers Guild Hammer-In. And then a lot of the people that were attending the Hammer-In, I didn't present the whole. I had 3 presentations. Thankfully, there are many different presenters because I followed that Hammer-In. Like you said, you're going to be traveling. You might as
mm,
well make that travel do work for you while you're out there, especially for you coming from Sheffield or from the UK all the
mm.
way to the US or the West Coast United States. Um, and so I also followed it with a 2-day class. But what happened? What I mean, it, it's networking. To, I think that there were a lot of people I met at the Hammerin because I only saw them at the Hammerin. It was cool to meet and connect with people directly in person. For me personally, it always is. But the people that went from the Hammerin that I met at the Hammerin and spent time talking to at the Hammerin, who carried over to the class, I got a total of 4 days with them, and you're right, with that much more time, there's a stronger connection, and some of these people I would consider more than acquaintances,
Yeah.
just new friends now, and I
Mhm.
love being out in the world and making the world a smaller place in these small little ways by teaching these classes and providing as much information. I'm right there with you, just trying to like unload everything I can, um, and
And
as
then
much
you realize that people have connections, and you kind of think, "Why have our paths not crossed before when we have
Sure,
so many people in common?"
absolutely,
And it's just like this circle of knife making, and I'm just on the periphery over here, and they're over here, and then the crossovers. It's
right,
fascinating.
yeah, it's almost like I at first I was thinking of like molecules in orbit around each other,
Mm,
but then I got this image of like um, when you see these movies with these giant ballrooms and everybody's spinning and swirling around and floating around each other, and occasionally, like
mm,
depending on the style of dance, then maybe sometimes they trade partners and stuff
mm,
like that. And
yeah.
it feels kind of like a dance when you realize I've somehow missed you, but we know a lot of people in common for a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah.
So, we haven't made dance partners yet. You mentioned, Ed Champ and going up to,
Mm.
Ephrata and doing a little class there with him, and it made me think of, uh, a hammer-in that I've been watching from the outside for a long time, that I always wanted to go to. Um, uh, Hazel Marguerite is a mutual friend of ours, and who I think got to reconnect with in
I
Seattle when
did.
you were
Yeah,
visiting, which
yeah.
is awesome. Um, I first met her when I was first starting out in 2014, 15, working out of Seattle, and And she used to go to this hammer in at Hank Nickmeyer's after Blade show every year. And she would,
Yeah.
it was like these sneaky little pictures you would see every once in a while, but it was a very like tight, what seemed like a very close, tight knit group of a lot, honestly, like a lot of the makers coming from abroad to
Mhm.
Blade show, getting together and going to Nick's and taking some time to make steel, maybe learn some stuff, but just more than anything, kind of like to hang out and socialize and get to know each other better. Maybe troubleshoot projects that you have going on or whatever, and drink too much bourbon and shoot longbows and stuff like
And
that.
guns.
And
Mhm.
guns, yeah.
Mhm. I'm allowed
And
to get excited about that.
yeah, and am I mistaken? Hank Nickmeyer
Hank
is not a,
Nickmeyer.
is
Yeah.
he's no longer around.
No, he isn't. No, he
Yeah,
died a couple of years ago, but he
yeah,
was extraordinary, and he managed to bring together a whole group of really interesting and diverse people,
right,
all kind of based around Damascus,
sure,
Mosaic Damascus, maybe.
yeah,
Um, kind of loosely either interested or so there was some. So Daryl Mayer used to go.
right.
He never used to make anything. He used to hang out and heckle, which is absolutely fine. Well, he didn't. He used to hang out in the shade, and we used to go on, go, Daryl, what do you think? What's gone wrong? And he
Yeah,
would give us his advice.
sure,
Um, and then, so there was like this generational thing as well. So there was
yeah,
um, Hank and Daryl and Ed to an extent,
sure,
and um, some other of the older guys. And then there was us youngsters. And we would generally be doing the work. I would always try and construct the craziest projects that
sure.
were way beyond my forging ability,
Okay,
because I knew that the expertise was there to help
right.
me out. And so yeah, whatever was the riskiest project that I could imagine, I would say for that particular event. And it was lovely.
Yeah,
It was, and it felt, again, this is the thing about the trust thing. So I felt like that these guys um, had felt a little battered over the years,
mm,
because obviously they, when they started out making um, Mosaic Damascus, they were really feeling the way. Um,
right,
and now all that knowledge is pretty much universal.
right.
And they've, I don't know, there was an element of trust that's been lost as far as passing down information.
Oh,
And it was
interesting.
because we get really good within academia, we're
Yeah.
very good at crediting written sources,
Oh,
and
yeah,
we're really poor as a craft making community about crediting kind of process sources
sure.
and how we might have learned, who we learned this from. And part of it is the fact that we're so involved in the making process that we
Mhm.
forget that this information hasn't just come from nowhere, that
Right,
we've learned from these people, and these
right.
people are still making in their own right. So
Yeah,
it's not like they're dead and gone. They deserve the credit for the work that they did
yeah,
40 years ago.
right.
Um, so
Yeah,
yeah, this felt like a safe space for them to be able to just sit back, and a low risk space that they felt that they could sit back and drink beer and watch a group of um, younger people, less experienced people,
right.
mess around with some techniques and benefit from them, um, without them either having to do a teacher class or kind of
Yeah,
do anything that involved too much work on their part. It
right.
was lovely. It was a really nice exchange of information and knowledge.
Yeah, and yeah, on top of that, it just looked like a great time. Um,
Absolutely.
no,
Yeah.
I think that's I agree, that there's a I feel like makers, for some reason, feel like if they admit that they learned something or got inspiration about something from somebody else, that
Mm.
it lessens them or takes away from that work, and that's it's not the case, and often it will help to maybe even potentially uplift their work.
Mm.
Um, I do think that it would be. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say there was an element of it being a secret society as well, and I think that often one of the problems that happens with a successful group like that is it gets too big.
Mm,
That you end up with it being kind of a victim of its own success,
right.
and then it has to become something more formal, and then you
Mhm.
have to, because it always does if you have more than, I don't know, 20 people there. I think, yeah, on a good year, sometimes there'd be 20 of us there, which is
Oh,
quite a
wow.
lot of you to kind of just be informally pottering around and making stuff. And
Right.
sometimes it'd be collaboratively and sometimes it'd be individually. And I mean, there's sometimes when I'd have a project that I would start one year and I'd leave there and then pick it up the next year,
Oh, wow.
you know. So
And and
yeah.
and when you just another aside, when you would go to this, did you already have a plan for something that you're like, I'm going to Blade, I'm going
Oh
to
yeah.
Hanks after, I have this plan, or or were you shooting from the hip?
No, I never shoot from the hip. I never do.
Okay.
I'd love to be more spontaneous. I have all my work planned out 2 years in advance.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. I just I love that collaboration. I think a lot of in that hammer, I mean, effectively it was a hammer, and I feel like it's
Mm,
a lot of hammer-ins similarly before used to be just like somebody like Hank
mm,
or Ed, or even like one of the first hammer-ins I went to was at Gary House's shop. And they would just invite their friends, just a few friends, to come over, hang out, and forge together. And more than anything, it was like a secondary way of getting people to come together, because otherwise they would only really see each other at Blade Show.
yeah,
Um, so getting friends together, showing and sharing some techniques, talking about current projects and stuff, so fun. And now
yeah.
hammer-ins have become more and more kind of not necessarily formal, but just kind of more almost like a spectator or educational kind of situation, where there's
Mm.
like I was at the Travis Horse Hammer, and there were like 150 or to 200 people there. That's quite a large crowd versus, a close lit crowd of, like you're saying, like 10
But I
to
think
20
there's a real
people.
the problem, it's not really a problem, but the issue is
Sure.
that, as I said, there's a real hunger for this.
Yeah.
So, as soon as there word gets out that there is
Yeah.
a successful and productive gathering happening,
Right.
um, yeah, there's this drive. More people want to join in, quite rightly.
Yeah. They
Um,
want to be part
but
of
it
it.
then does change the dynamic of it quite
Yeah.
considerably.
That is interesting to think about,
Mm,
because I've just in the last, well, I guess it was 2 years ago, me and a group of makers got together for a hammer in, and it was a very small thing. It's
mm,
essentially one guy invited a few friends to come hang out and do something interesting with steel, and we didn't really have a super solid idea, but we were all trying to contribute to it and approach Damascus making from a different direction, um, and try to take it not necessarily the whole thing to another level, just to try to innovate a new approach.
mm.
And it was fun, but there were definitely people who were like, "Why didn't I get invited to that? And how do I get to this thing?" It's like, well, it's not, not, first off, it's not my thing. It's not my shop we're doing this at. Well, that's up to him. But it is hard once it becomes known that it's the thing that's happening, and then
Mm,
everybody wants to come to it. And how do you manage that? So
mm.
but something else I wanted to get back to that you started to mention too is about crediting people, and I would be curious, because I feel like I can kind of draw my lineage of who I learned from and inspirations, but I don't know exactly who they would draw their lineage from, and inspirations. And some might be contemporary, from contemporaries, but working from side to side. Or some might be have mutual kind of like the person above them that they also learn from. I would be curious to do like a survey of sorts. Um,
Family tree.
yeah, basically a family tree, and
Mm.
not necessarily drawing out back up to one single source, but just to get a better idea of where these ideas have been coming from, or
Yeah,
where
and
how where these
we'll pick and
foundations.
mix as well, won't we? I
Sure,
mean, like
absolutely.
so, um, it might be a small technique or it might be
Right.
Damascus, or I mean, I can definitely credit almost my entire connections and network knifing network
Yeah.
through Ed Shemp.
Oh, wow.
Because when I was doing my PhD, I was doing it in non-traditional laminated steels,
Okay.
and I had contacted a whole load of people to see if they would use the steel that I was making. Bear in mind, I'm in Sheffield and I'm completely outside. This was 25 years ago,
Right.
20 years ago.
Okay.
And knife making was a very different place. The kind of the internet. Oh God, I'm going to sound old now.
No.
But it was different then, and
Yeah.
so I'd contacted Ed and asked him, and he'd said that he didn't think it was something that he'd be interested in, but he was actually due to come over to the Paris show
Oh,
in a few months. I was kind of like, what? There's a Paris knife show?
right.
And it's only over the water. So I went over to, and there was some other, well, there was Hank there, and there was some other people there who were like gods of knife making as far as I was concerned.
Right.
And I was just too nervous to go and speak to them. But Ed had his glasses held together with sellotape, and I just thought, there's no way I can be nervous about going up and speaking to somebody whose glasses are held together with sellotape.
Sure.
And because I then spent time with him, he then introduced me to a whole load of people, and also was really careful, clever about telling me who I should speak to because of this, who I
Sure.
should speak to because of, oh, you'd like to learn more about making non-traditional slip joints. Okay, these guys. So it's almost like he curated the
Yeah.
entire knife community and said, these are your ways in, and they would be useful to you. They're worth contacting. They're nice people. They're helpful. So it was through him that I ended up going to Hank's.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I can draw some of my lineage actually to Ed Shemp as well. Because I got my start in Damascus making from Bob. So I'm basically directly below Bob. But then I think Ed Shemp, while I was still working for Bob went to either to Hank's after Blade Show or to Hammer In with Ed, or even just conversations with Ed, talking about, like, I think W's explosions.
Right.
And so it's from that conversation, I remember clearly, like, Bob coming. I have no idea where he had been or who he had been talking to, but he's like, my friend Ed, he gave me this, and he drew out like a kind of a schematic, and this is how you get it to weld together. And so we started doing W's explosions in the shop. And I don't know if that was a brand new thing for Bob too. I think he had initially tried it on his own, and then I think he had some success, and then while I was still working for Bob, showed me that process. But from there, I don't know where it goes above Ed, if it was just something that was developed with a group of guys, and it pioneered a new step of assembling materials to create these patterns. From there, yeah, so I'd have to be like, okay, Ed,
Yeah.
tell us about where this comes from.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's very, that was definitely something I would be interested in, because I know Laren Thomas just did a book about Damascus and steel and stuff like that, and I think it would be impossible to get all the information from all the different makers from all around the world, and where they draw their lineage and their histories and stuff like that, and their contributions. But it would be curious. I would be curious at least to talk to Ed and to
There's
get his.
broad strokes anyway,
Yeah,
aren't there?
sure.
I mean,
Yeah,
obviously that there's a whole load of people kind of through the ABS
right.
who, get their information or have got their information over the years through them. And then the lecturers that they had available, have changed over the years.
Sure.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's just the kind of a geeky academic thing that
Sure. Well,
fascinates me.
yeah. Well, and simultaneous innovation is also a real thing. So even though, whoever Ed and a couple of the makers or whoever were doing it here, somewhere over in Europe, somebody could have been coming up and figuring out the exact same idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the idea that, you come at something from a different way. So the end results might be the same, but because your skills and your workshop and your background are different, you might have approached it a different way.
Right.
So, yeah.
It's very intriguing. It's
Yeah.
cool. Talking about lineage and stuff like that. I want to take we're already like almost an hour and we're 45 minutes in. I think the first 10 was me blabbering, but we've been talking for a while already. I want to kind of step back and get an idea of who little Gracie Horne was when she was growing up. I'm sorry if Gracie's not a cute name for what you grew up with, but what it was like for you growing up, where you grew up. Were your parents creative, artsy people? Were there other family members or other people that inspired you as you grew up? Have you always been kind of this curious engineer of sorts, and building and creating and all other kind of modalities, I guess, that led to you working in knives as part of your PhD?
Well, in hindsight, it looks like certainly my professional life has been really well orchestrated. And it's not. I've just basically lurched from one thing to the next.
Okay,
And it's only in hindsight that it hangs together. At the time, I
sure,
didn't. And certainly it's not. Although I say now that I plan my work out 2 years in advance, you would believe then that little 16-year-old Grace had her life planned out in front of her, and that really was not the case at all.
sure.
So,
Okay,
yeah, you've got to bear that in mind when I tell the
okay,
story. So
all right,
I was born in Australia.
okay,
My mother was half German, half Polish.
okay,
She moved to Australia when she was a teenager. My father was British. He's an architect. And he moved to Australia after he qualified, met my mother, and had 2 children. And then this was the beginning of the 70s. And in Australia at the time, there was a series of strikes. We were in Sydney and we were in a very modern house, and there was refuse workers' strikes and also utility workers' strikes where sometimes the power would go out and that sort of thing.
mm,
And they were both very aware of how vulnerable they were, living in a modern house in the centre of Sydney. So they kind of wanted to do the typical hippie thing and go
oh,
back to small holding and kind of,
sure,
okay, they were probably hippie preppers, but we wouldn't call them that at the time.
sure,
And they decided that my father had a very successful architectural business, but it meant that he wasn't doing any of the architecture that he enjoyed doing. He was basically
oh,
just managing a company. And
right,
this is important because it has really informed me over the years that it's possible to be a victim of your own success as a creative person, that you
oh,
end up
interesting.
running a company rather than doing what you love doing.
Getting your hands
And
dirty still.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was something that I was aware of very early on. I'm pretty good at learning from other people's mistakes.
Mm.
Um, and that was something that he felt very strongly about. So they uprooted us all, moved us across the world, and bought a small farm in a little place on the Welsh borders,
Okay.
and between Wales and England. And it was just 25 acres, and they wanted to be as off the grid and as independent as possible. And they knew nothing. They had to learn all this from scratch. And they also had to restore the
Oh,
house that we were living in at the same time. And we had sheep and we had goats and we had dairy cows. And if you need somebody to pluck your chicken or to milk a goat or make cheese, I'm your woman. I
oh,
can do all
nice.
that.
That's great.
Yeah,
Wow.
absolutely useful life skills. I haven't used them too much recently, but
Sure.
come the end of the world, come the zombie apocalypse, my place is going to be the best place to be.
Yeah.
Um, and then sometime, no, let's go on. So when I was looking for what I was going to do after school, still
Okay.
no real idea. I knew I wanted to do something creative. My mother was very heavily into textiles,
Oh,
um, and she was a spinner and weaver. My father was really a woodworker. That was where his heart was.
okay.
So he always had a woodworking workshop at home. Um, and when I did my degree, and it was a lovely degree actually. It was in wood, metal, plastics, and technology. And in the
Okay.
first year, you had to do all four. And then the second year, you had to choose two of those to take forward. And in the third year, you had to produce a body of work, and it could be quite skewed. And I ended up doing 75% metal, 25% technology. Now, anybody who knows me is going to go, that technology was a really, really bad idea.
Okay.
But okay, technology could be low tech or high tech. And
Hmm.
low tech, my project for that was a recycled. I worked for a corrugated cardboard company,
Okay.
designing them a trade stand that they could dismantle and collapse and recycle. Because I thought it was really sad that their trade stand was just an ordinary bog standard one, but they had this amazing material that they
Hmm.
could use that would really showcase their thing. Anyway, so even I at the time thought this is a complete waste of time. I'm just marking time. Metal is where I really want my heart to be. However, fast forward now, 35 odd years, I still take little my displays to Blade Show. My cardboard thing is all collapsed in my suitcase, and then I
Oh,
take it
wow.
out and I make my table display.
I love
And
it.
then at the end of the show, I collapse it, throw it away, and make a new one every year. And I just think, isn't it strange? Again, only in hindsight, you can see this little kernel that started then
Yeah.
is still relevant and useful to me now. So don't dismiss these things that look like side quests at the time, because you just
Sure.
don't know whether they're going to be valuable to you later.
Absolutely. No, I love it. And I think I showed up at your table this year almost a little too early while you were still setting up. But I always love seeing your display because you do such a wonderful job, not only with this display, but even the packaging. I absolutely adore your packaging. And you're probably still using similar principles to make
Absolutely.
all the little boxes and everything
Yeah.
fits together. And some of the examples we have of your work exemplify that beautifully. But
I
yeah,
mean,
I just
part of
love it.
that is to stop burnout.
Sure.
So when I decided that I was going to focus on metal instead,
Mhm.
kind of, it was really, I did wonder whether I was going to do textiles or metal, and I
Okay.
decided that it was going to be easier to do metal full time and keep textiles as a hobby than
Okay.
it would be to do textile full time and do metal as a hobby. It just didn't seem like it would be as easy.
Right.
So I really got heavily into metals, but at the end of that kind of course, I realized that wasn't really into jewelry. That I really loved working in the engineering workshop, down on the lathe and on the milling machine.
Oh, interesting.
Um, and the project that I decided to do for my final project
Yeah.
was 3 folding knives
Yeah.
with Damascus blades. Now, I'd just like you to bear in mind that I had never made Damascus before. I had never forged anything before. I had never made a knife before. So rather than going the normal route, which is to forge or kind of make a fixed blade knife and
Mhm.
then work up from there, with the absolute optimism and arrogance of ignorance, I just throw myself into this project straight away.
Wow. That's amazing.
um, and these were really because I remember my father losing his pocket knife,
Mm.
and it must have been just a carbon steel rosewood handle made in Sheffield. He'd have bought it from the farmers co-op. He
Right.
wasn't a knife person. That both my parents would carry a knife every day, but they
Sure.
weren't really knife people.
Sure.
But no other knife lived up to that knife that he lost. It kind of took on mythical proportions. And then when I was looking for a project, I'd read a description. during the romance of my teenage years of Richard the Lionheart meeting Saladin on the battlefield, and Richard the Lionheart kind of like cutting a tree in two, and all the kind of European soldiers cheering and thinking this was great. And Saladin threw up a silk handkerchief and cut it in half on the way down. And that was my first introduction to Damascus steel, the idea that there might be better steels out there than the ones that we come across generally. Now, this was 1988.
Okay.
So this was a long time. Yeah. And there was very little available on the internet at that time.
Right.
So I contacted the British Artist Blacksmiths Association. Richard Quinnell was chairman of that at the time, and I asked him whether there was any way that I could get hold of any Damascus steel. He said, no, but you can come down and make it. I kind of like, okay. So this was the start of people being incredibly generous.
Sure.
And helping me to kind of learn things and realize that there was I had this real hunger to learn this new thing. And that was the start of my fascination with Damascus steel.
Right. I'm curious because I feel like, especially back in that time, there were so few women in the industry. There's still today very few women in comparison to the number of men making knives and forging steel and forging blades, which I mean, I feel like obviously yourself, Haley DeRosiers, Audra Draper, women are very capable of doing the same work, especially with all the different tools available to us. There's no reason that you can't. I would wonder if there was just some curiosity there on his behalf, on his side too, just that a woman came out of nowhere asking for Damascus, and be like, what? This never happens. And you striking up his curiosity and be like, who is this? And like, let's work.
I know he's got a daughter who now runs and she's only a few years older than me. And she's always been very involved in the Fire and Iron Gallery that he runs. So amazing. I think that was part of it as well, that he had a belief in the he knew that Lucy would have been able to do it, and therefore he didn't think twice about the fact that but one thing I did do was, when I was researching that project, I contacted Sheffield, because I wasn't studying up here at the time. Contacted Sheffield and I said, is there anybody who can teach me how to make folding knives? And they went, no one around. So I had to figure it out myself. I didn't do a very good job. I still like the design, but they never worked particularly well. It was certainly a learning curve. And then a few years later, I was actually down in London, and I heard a report on the radio, an interview with a guy called Stan Shaw. And they said that he was the last little master of Sheffield. I went, wait, hold on. They lied to me. There are still guys making knives in Sheffield. What do you mean there's nobody who could show me how to do this? I was completely outraged, and tried to contact Stan, and he didn't respond to my letters, and he didn't respond to my phone call. So I packed up all my belongings and moved up to Sheffield.
Oh, wow.
To camp on his doorstep. And again, like, well, why not?
Yeah.
And he reckoned he was too old to take on an apprentice at that time. And he was 70, early 70s. And so he sent me away with a whole load of springs and blades and told me to go and figure it out myself, because it wasn't that hard. And that's a very Sheffield way of dealing with it. I'm constantly amazed at how they undervalue their skills.
Wow.
Certainly the old traditional, the old guard of Sheffield, they just don't think they're doing anything special, which is just tragic. He sent me away with a whole load of blades that, even at the time, with my lack of knowledge, I realized were too precious for me to actually muck around with them. They were hand forged blades that had never been made up into knives from 180 years ago.
Oh
Like,
my gosh.
still with a little forging nib on and everything. Like,
Wow.
so I never did make them up into knives. I was waiting until I was good enough to do them justice. And they're
And
still sitting in my drawer,
they're on display.
waiting for me to be good
They're
enough to
still
do them justice.
That's amazing. Oh, wow. I can't even imagine, trying to incorporate something that was forged 100 years ago into my own work.
Oh.
And there was a time a while ago where there were a bunch of sabatiers where I think they came from France, like
Mm,
a factory shut down, and somehow somebody got a hold of a bunch of blades, and they were being sold. I think in Europe as well as the U.S. And it's through kitchen knife forums or other blade forums, which was the social media of the time that they were
mm,
being sold. And I never ended up getting my hands on any of them, but I
mm,
really did love the idea of potentially getting a hold of a blade that was forged, and it could have been as recent as maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago,
mm,
but just something that was part of kind of like that heritage and that history that comes down to me as a culinary knife maker, starts in Sheffield and in France really, and part in Solingen, I believe,
mm.
parts of Germany.
Yeah.
Um, and I am a little bit sad that I don't have one of those, but I do collect. I collect while I make pretty and fancy looking chef's knives and all this stuff. I collect vintage antique, well, or not antique, but
Mm,
vintage knives that are high carbon steel. That was probably somebody's grandma's knife that, when she passed on, this was part of the stuff that nobody wanted, and it went to an antique store. It was sold in a estate sale, and I see them and all of their staining, and I think they're absolutely gorgeous because, to me, that's a reflection of their use and the time with these. There's, I don't feel like I'm gonna get emotional all of a sudden, but um, that person's existence and use of that tool is there on that knife.
Yeah. When as makers we sell a piece,
Yeah,
that's only the very beginning of their journey, isn't
sure.
it? And you
Absolutely.
you hope that your piece will at some point get so worn down and so passed down the generations
Yeah,
that, yeah, that somebody will go, wow, what's this extraordinary, strange little thing that's been sharpened with an inch of its life?
right.
Yeah, I think that's great as well. And the stuff that I collect, I'm very, a lot of my work is very influenced and informed by either historical artifacts or research that I do.
Right.
Um, and a lot of the pieces that I collect aren't necessarily the pieces that um, normal collectors would collect. So they
Mm,
often like pristine or good quality, not good quality, but well preserved pieces. And whilst there is definitely a role for those,
right.
there is also um, a really important body of work in my collection that is very battered and broken. And that
Mhm.
means that I, as a researcher, can actually start seeing what's happening inside
Mm,
um, in a way that if it was pristine and, if somebody gave you something that was 200 years old and it was absolutely perfect, you wouldn't want to pull it apart to see what was going on inside.
sure. Right.
Um, or see just how imagine how it would get used if it had been sharpened for
Sure.
50 years. But actually that tells a story of how the piece was used and also how the piece responded to use. Oh,
Right.
look, there's a dodgy repair that's been done there.
Right.
That's because that's a weak spot. Well, if it had
Interesting.
just been
Yeah.
put in a drawer for 200 years, you wouldn't have known that, would you?
Right. Yeah. So how the engineering works out over time
Mm,
of the different tools
yeah,
and materials used, and yeah, that's so interesting. Well,
yeah.
and I think we live in such in a it's talked about all the time, but just like in a consumer world where, um, honestly, a lot of products are unfortunately engineered to not last forever.
Mm,
And I feel like there was a time where the quality of manufacturer was really important because it was really difficult to earn enough money to buy something. And then when you did, you wanted it had to be of such good quality that would last
Yeah.
generations potentially. And that's what I feel like I'm striving to do. And when I tell people like a knife that I make could last at least 100 years if it's properly cared for, and yeah, it will over multiple sharpenings, it'll get narrower and narrower, but it should still continue to function and be useful even 100 years later. And I think in today's day, it feels very awkward to think about that, but I look at knives that I even collect that are 50 years old that still have plenty of life in them, and stuff that obviously, like you're saying, the stuff in museums is pretty pristine because it hasn't been used, but I even ones that were used, they're still there. And probably you could, if you were allowed to pull it out of the case and had the audacity to try to cut something with it, I'm pretty confident it would cut pretty well.
Yeah, and there's also that human element, isn't there? I mean, I've
Right.
got a boning knife that my mother used, that she used so often because she was processing meat and carcasses from the farm,
Yeah.
that I can see that she's had to shave. It's just a plastic handled one, but it's pretty good.
Sure.
And she's had to shave some of the bit off to fit her hand better.
Right.
And she's not with us anymore. Like that's the shape of her hand.
Yeah.
And even though it doesn't fit my hand as well as it fitted hers, I
Yeah.
wouldn't ever change it because, oh God, it's her hand.
Right. That's beautiful.
So, yeah.
I love that. Not to try to shift gears too dramatically, so I stop crying.
Okay, so I'm going to continue with my
Oh yeah,
story.
please. Sorry.
Then when I moved to Sheffield and Stan wasn't going to take me on as apprentice, I realised that I'd need to set up my own workshop if it was something that I was going to do seriously. But I realised that Sheffield Hallam University, was just about to start a master's in metalwork and jewellery, and two important things: they wouldn't mind if I did knives and edge tools rather than jewelry, and they didn't mind if I did it part-time. It was meant to be a 2-year full-time course. They didn't mind if I did it part-time. It took 4 years, which basically meant that it was cheaper for me to do that course than it was to set up my own workshop because I could use all their equipment.
Wow.
And they'd
You're a
never stop me
genius.
going in the workshop.
Oh
So
my
I
God,
did
that's so smart.
2.5 days
Yeah.
a week as a student and 2.5 days just blagging their machinery because nobody stopped me and went, "Oh, is that really college work?" And kind of like, well, it's could be college work, might
Yeah.
not be college work.
Part of your study. Yeah.
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 And then I accidentally had my oldest child halfway through that.
Okay.
So I spun that out for 5 years. And then I came to the end of my master's and I was just about to come off the end of it and just go off and do my own thing. I was restoring Japanese armor at the time as a
Oh
side
wow.
gig, just as an aside, just for the fun of it.
Sure.
Not just for the fun of it. I had a client over in the States who would fly me out to pick the armor up, and then I would do the work and then fly back over with it. It was quite serious.
How do you
Good
even
fun
make a
though. Good
connection with
fun.
somebody like that?
Y Yeah,
How cool.
and he was a very serious collector, and he realized that there weren't that many people around who would do stuff with a kind of overlap between metal and textiles and leatherwork and lacquer, and it was something that I was quite happy to cover all of that.
Wow.
So that was quite cool. But come to the end of my MA, and I kind of like literally the last few months, and I'm imagining that I'm just going to go out and do my own thing. And one of the academic staff members stopped me in the corridor and said, "Have you ever thought about doing a PhD?" I went, no, no, because I'm not really that academic. Really, it's kind of not something that, yeah, not something I ever thought about. And
Yeah.
he said, well, if you did, what would you do it in? And I went, oh, I know what I'd do it in. And I told him, and he went, I think we can draft up a funding proposal for that.
Oh, wow.
And between the two of us, we got a funded PhD to do solid state diffusion bonded non-traditional Damascus steel and its role within custom contemporary knife making. So
Wow. That sounds really
I spent
that's a lot of
5
fancy
years.
words, but that's a really important thing that's very
Yeah.
commonly used these days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mucking around. And you have to admit that I have to bear in mind this was 22 years ago. So
Okay.
again, it was a long time ago. Things have certainly moved on since then. But I was making Damascus steel with steel and pure silver layers in, and then making them into knives. And my two quick questions were, is it possible and is it worth it? And yes, it's possible, and no, it's not worth it.
Oh, okay.
But because there isn't enough difference between the two.
Okay.
But I learned a huge amount and loved it. And what I learned most, actually, because it was a practice-based PhD,
Yeah.
so my thesis and the kind of material science bit, although that was a really steep learning curve as far as I was concerned, it wasn't really about that. It was more about making the pieces and making them work and getting
Right.
that technology to work. But also, part of the practice-based research is that you examine your own practice as source material.
Oh, okay.
So I got very good at documenting my own process in order to then reflect upon it as a researcher.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And at the time, just to add another layer of complication, so I had a 5-year-old child and a newborn, because I had my second child halfway through my PhD.
Oh my
Because
gosh.
why not?
Can't even imagine.
Because I got funding, I got maternity leave,
Yeah.
and I
Okay.
realized that it was the only time I'd ever get maternity leave. So, like,
Okay.
I said to my partner, my husband, like, if we want another baby, we should really do it now. But I also had my very disabled mother living next door to us at the
Okay.
time. We'd moved her up. She had MS and she was needing
Oh,
24-hour care
yeah.
at the time. So 5-year-old, newborn baby, and a disabled mother living next door. So
Right.
really, I had slots of time that I could work. So my sketchbooks became increasingly important to me
Mm,
because I could work on my sketchbooks at home, but I would only ever have 2 hours, a window of 2 hours that I could go down to the workshop.
right.
So I would have to be very focused on what I was wanting to do within those 2 hours. I couldn't just go down and go, "Oh, well, I'll just see what the steel decides to do."
You had to
I'd
hit the
have to have,
ground running.
yeah, absolutely, and
Yeah.
know exactly what I was doing.
Right.
So, yeah, documentation of my sketchbooks became really important because it meant that I could then be productive at home. I had a textile studio at home. I had a sewing machine and that sort of thing. And that
Yeah.
was really how, I mean, my textile practice and my metalwork practice look like two very different things. But as
Mhm.
far as I'm concerned, it's just a continuation from one to the other, and
Right.
it's all engineering.
Right.
And my boxes and my pouches now are really, yeah, kind of, when I feel I'm very good at procrastinating.
Mm,
And I like to think of it as productive procrastination. So when I
ah,
should be doing one thing, so
right.
when I'm feeling like I don't want to be going down the workshop,
Yeah.
or I feel like I'm running up to the end to a show and I'm feeling like I'm burning out,
Yeah.
I can stay at home and I can make pouches and boxes and that sort of thing, and know that I'm still being productive to the end goal, but not burn out quite as
Yeah.
quickly. And though each side of that feeds on each other,
Right.
which is very important.
Mm,
Yeah,
that is
to me.
that is a really good thing to do because I struggle with burnout.
Mm.
And I think part of the reason is because I've only been doing the knife making for a total of almost 15 years now, but the last 10 years on my own.
Mm.
And so in the last couple of years, I've been trying to mix it up with the teaching to help try to beat that burnout so that I am still being productive in the way that I'm essentially still earning a
Mhm.
living for support to support my family, but it's not necessarily from standing at a grinder or
Yeah.
standing at the forge and the anvil. Because for my brain, I need to mix it up more because otherwise I fizzle. And I don't know, honestly, upon reflection, I don't know how I went, 8 years without changing things up.
Mhm.
I did have Damascus patterns definitely became an outlet for me, and like side missioning, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, to satiate that
Mm.
desire, that creative exploration. But I always did have to come back to knife making,
Mm.
but it wasn't in a productive way because I would side mission and then I would just stop, set it down, and then I'd come back. So really, I just delayed. I had technically just procrastinated on what I was actually supposed to be doing. So I guess all that to say, I completely can relate. And yeah, I wonder if that's a creative issue or a thing about that a lot of creative people experience,
Well,
or
when you think
imagine
about it,
experience.
very often we've started off making as a hobby,
Right.
and then people tell us that, "Oh, you're good enough. You could give them away." So you give them away, and then, "Oh, look, you're so good. You could sell them." And so you sell them. "Oh, you're so good. You could become a full-time maker." And it's like our craft, uh, the quality of our craft is being validated by our ability to be business people. And
Mm.
that's so not true, because then when we become business people, that's a completely different skill set.
You're so right. That's so, oh my gosh. I don't know why I've never even thought about. Yeah. It's just it it you said that and it's just like this realization that it's just pursuit of validation. And it has just been keep continuing to drive it towards being in business and selling them for more and more money every time.
Yeah. I mean, I come at this from, I mean, I have to put my hand up. I am the least business-minded person in the world, and that's just the way that I accept that I am. So
Yeah.
certainly early on, I would work on a job that I didn't enjoy doing or I felt I could hate, so that I
Mm.
could keep my workshop practice special
Oh,
to me. Um, and that was a conscious decision because I didn't want to end up doing things. I tried it for a little bit and realized that I was producing work that other people wanted me to produce, um, rather than what I wanted to produce.
right.
And I lost patience with that really, really quickly. And now I've probably only just reached the stage where I can, in the last few years, where I produce the stuff that I want to produce, and there is a market there that will take whatever I sell. I mean, I've been selling out in half an hour, even at Blade Show.
Yeah.
And yeah, okay, that means that I should increase my prices. I accept that, right? Bob gave me the talk.
Oh, supply and demand.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, but you know, ah,
Yeah.
I'm doing what I love. I make what I want to make,
Yeah.
and put it out there. And we're at a stage now where the demand is there.
Yeah.
So
That's wonderful. I'm so glad and happy for you because I think that
self-indulgent maker. I am totally self-indulgent when it
that
comes to making.
yeah. I do think it's good though that you found ways to kind of, I don't know, trick your mind in a way, almost, or
Mhm.
so that you could keep your making special. Um, I will say, I got to a place where I was comfortable with the pricing and the work that I was making. And yeah, I just kept kind of pushing the price up because understanding, well, and also from my background working with Bob, but
Mm.
just also trying to understand that I am the supply. I'm a very limited supply, and based on the way I'm manufacturing and making my knives, there's not a lot being made. And so that if there's demand, then that means you can kind of push that price up.
Mm.
But I've gotten to a place almost, I kind of like am in a place where I feel like I am at odds or kind of struggle with the pricing.
Mm.
There are people who find it value enough and pay the pricing, but at the same time, I think more of the struggle is just my own internal shit, basically, where I'm struggling with valuing myself and my
Yeah,
time
but we are not the customers for our own
yeah,
product.
right.
And the other thing, that the mantra for me for the last few years has been, just because I can doesn't mean I should.
Oh yeah,
So, but I have to keep reminding myself of that all the time.
sure.
So some things feed my soul and I love doing
Mm,
them, like my table displays. Every
yeah,
time I think I should streamline this and make this, no, every year I just love doing it. I need the break just before I go. It gives me,
yeah.
particularly before Blade Show, it's always so rushed on the run up to it. And the idea of drawing a line under the work that I've done and kind of go, okay, now I've got to take a step back and think about how my pieces look and how I communicate my work to an outside audience, particularly as they're these days almost all scissors, and certainly a lot of them are historically based, and there's a lot of information that I want people to know, in
Mm-hmm.
which case, how am I going to communicate? I think that's a really valuable break from the workshop to the show mentality.
Right.
And then there are a whole load of other things that I've realized that don't give me joy, and there is no reason why I can't outsource them. Like the
Mm.
teaching blanks that I do
Oh
for
yeah, sure.
my workshops, I can get somebody else to grind them for me, like surface grind them for me. Like,
Right.
why am I spending hours standing in front of a grinder doing that? That does not make sense. I could do it, but why would I, when somebody, like, when somebody else can do it, is better skilled at doing it, and
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I could be doing something else that
Right.
only I can do and that I want to do. So,
You are
yeah.
business minded. That's called scaling. You're outsourcing what isn't important while you and your talent and
Working
skill
on
and
it.
your
I'm
mind
working on it.
is better spent doing what only you can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And honestly, like some people are just better tooled up and
Yeah.
set up to do that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
which totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's where they're playing and that's where they're happy.
Mm.
Great. Help them out. Give them
Yeah.
work. Why
Yeah.
not?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And honestly, like I off and on I talk to people, different makers, custom makers versus production makers about production work. And really it still comes down to say the blanks are water jet, and then you have somebody else doing some portion of the grinding.
Mm.
Maybe even somebody else is doing the profiling if you've designed the profiling, or even their water jet in a particular way.
Mm.
Um, the absolute finished product and your final eyes and touch on making sure everything's dialed in really is where it is the most important.
Mm.
It's kind of the whole how the sausage is made. Not everybody knows or even really cares about
Yeah.
now, especially sausage. It's not super important, but to a point. But how it tastes, how it looks, like at the very end, how it's pretend like all the experience and cooking, eating it and everything is what's important.
Mm.
Um,
But
and I try to keep,
transparency, I think, is key on that. I think
yeah,
that over
absolutely,
too often, over the last 20 or so years, with the increasing use of technology and outsourcing and that sort of thing, people haven't been transparent about it, and that's partly because they've been defensive about using it. So
sure.
within the Sheffield, and also so within the European knife making tradition,
Hmm.
nobody made it. Sole authorship was not a thing. It
Right.
just, you would go to the best person to get that bit done, and the cutler was the person who assembled it at the end. But and I accept that that has changed over the years, where the infrastructure of people around you, particularly here in Sheffield, has kind of fallen away, where you don't have these highly skilled specialists around you that you can
Right.
call on. But I think that these days, we're one of the great things about, you know, making having networks, and also you know, the internet, it doesn't matter whether this person is a mile down the road or 200 miles away or
Yeah.
1,000 miles away. You
Right.
know, that we can now specialize and do collaborations in a way that wasn't possible 30 years ago.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I do think there is an opportunity too for people who do um all, like, as many of the processes, the
Mm.
hand makers, especially with the way we use social media to kind of, and you actually, I feel like, do an exemplary job of showing so much of your process and the different steps. You're telling a story in a way, you're crafting a story, you're taking people along the journey of the creation of a thing, whether they are actually going to end up potentially being your clients and buying the product, or if they're other makers, or honestly just people that are curious and interested in a thing and the history. And you do so much
Mm.
talking in live streams about the history of different pieces and from your collection, or that you come across, or even books,
Yeah,
and
you
documents
realize
that
that
you find.
the artifacts that you finally put out are, it's like an iceberg. It's tiny compared to all the stuff that's gone on behind it. And people are as fascinated by the bit that is behind it as they are in the actual artifact
Yeah,
at the end of it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel like I disrupted your story again. I
No.
don't know if we quite got there. We got to the end.
Oh, no, we didn't, because
Yeah,
14 years ago, I'm making folding pocket knives,
right.
and I want to make a pair of scissors to go
Mhm.
into my pocket knife, and it works.
Oh, right.
It's made
Yeah.
from some Ed Shemp Damascus, actually.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah, and Matt Diskin buys it, even though it's not finished.
Oh,
Never sell anything that isn't finished. Good God, I
oh,
should have learnt this lesson by now. Um,
okay.
and so it's two-bladed knife with a pair of scissors, and it works okay. Doesn't work great, but I don't know how to make it any better, and you
Oh,
know what I'm actually looking for in scissors. So I start thinking about what makes scissors, and realize that there's very little documented.
mm,
And in Sheffield, there was still an old company that employ three old guys who are all over 60, and they are the last scissor makers in the UK, making kind of scissors the traditional way.
yeah.
Um, and I go down, introduce myself, and persuade them to teach me to make scissors,
Oh, wow.
which is how I fell down the rabbit hole of scissor making. And I realized that all my years of making slip joint folders was merely training for making scissors, because they satisfy the same bit in me that loved making slip joint folders,
Okay.
because they're faffy, and then you can't make any definitive rules. If you make them 20% bigger, then you don't make this bit 20% bigger, and you know,
Mm,
like, the feel is different, and
yeah,
they are just glorious.
absolutely.
So yeah, and then I was on the scissors bandwagon, and I just love it. I just love it. There's so much information out there, and it's so poorly documented, and it seems
Sure.
such an obvious thing for knife makers to make, and they
Yeah.
don't.
I want
Um,
to. I still want to. And you are definitely my inspiration.
oh, good. What I'd really like in 10 years' time is to go to Blade Show and see half a dozen other people making scissors. That
Right.
would be perfect as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
That's my ultimate goal. And part of that, getting to that end point, was taking the process that I was seeing at Ernest Wright's,
Hmm.
and they were using specialist machinery to put the curve and the twist on the blade, and I
Hmm.
was like, that's just not feasible. There's no way that I could afford to get a piece of machinery like that. Well, you can't find them. They're all they're not available anymore. You know, you
Oh,
can't get that. There's no
Yeah.
point in looking. They're just not available. Okay, fine. So how can I take the process that I've now learned and find a way of applying that to be made in my own workshop, not using specialist tools? So I went back and I had a look at some of the documentation that described the pre-industrial process of making scissors. So
Right.
early 1800s. Well, by the time we're up to mid 1800s, we've got the height of the kind of Victorian industrialization of the cutlery process, and we start getting industrialists who are making machines to help this process. And because they are extolling the virtues of their new wonderful scissor grinding machine or whatever it is that they're doing,
Yeah.
they describe the process that their machine is
Is
taking over
replacing.
from.
Oh,
And by looking at that information, the
yeah.
whole that is in that information, and so yeah, the although the techniques that I'm teaching, it's not like I'm never going to say that this is not the only way of making scissors. By
Sure.
no means. It is one way, but it means that it is scissor making is possible within a knife making workshop with no specialist tools, which is
That's
cool.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting that in their marketing to extol the virtues of their new equipment, they
Mm.
are accidentally archiving the historical approach.
Yeah,
Otherwise, how much other information is there around those traditional techniques?
absolutely. Yeah. The only other, so I also fell down the rabbit hole a little bit of needle making.
Mm,
Um, and as soon as you start thinking about sewing needles and how fine they are and how you might go about making them in their thousands, you kind of go, oh, okay, that's like a whole different ball game. And that's even more poorly documented than scissor making.
oh, wow.
And that's another source. So again, a document that describes how scissor making was done before this machine was invented to do it. That's yeah, again, as far as the source goes, that they're
Yeah,
highly recommended.
yeah,
But
very
you see,
interesting.
unless that's kind of in my heart of hearts, I think I'm a researcher,
Sure.
and that's something that the PhD helped me realize,
Mm,
and but also it helped me realize that it doesn't work in isolation, and
mm.
that that actually purely academic purely academic research has weaknesses. And I know I was being a little bit cautious on that one.
Yeah,
Um,
I noticed that.
must not diss my
Right.
researchers,
Do
my
I
fellow
do I say this out
academics.
loud?
Must not,
How do I say
must
this
not,
out loud?
yeah, that's um, because I wouldn't have known what I was looking for in those texts if I
Sure.
hadn't got the practical knowledge that I'd already built up, and also the specific question that I wanted answering.
Mm,
So, I don't know how well, hundreds of people must have read those texts. They're not new,
sure.
they're not something that I've discovered.
Right.
Um, if you'd asked any of them to have described a process of scissor making that didn't involve specialist machinery, none of them would have been able to tell you, because they
Right.
wouldn't recognize that key couple of sentences that made me go, that I think I know what they did. I think
Yeah.
I know what they're describing.
Ah,
Uh,
that's so interesting. And I feel like and I would be curious if you follow this train of thought maybe a little bit, of course, in your own way. But I've found that and obviously culinary knives have grown in popularity, especially amongst makers. Um, whereas, even 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, further you go back, even back to like, what was it, the late 90s, early 2000s, when like Bob Kramer and Bill Burke were getting their master smiths and stuff. There weren't many people making culinary knives. And even still today, and when sorry, so then when I first started going to knife shows, um, from my own experience, understood culinary knives, and I was designing my knives based off of that experience. Now I was trying to pair that with them being beautiful as well as, but firstly, functional as practical tools. And my experience using them as tools helped to inform that. And when I would present my work at a show, people would walk by, and lots of people would almost walk right by my table, to the point where actually I started standing out front of my table to become a physical obstacle to block people, so that they would kind of have to slow down and look at my table. And they didn't even know if who I
Mm.
was, that was my table. They just, because I was there, they had to slow down. And they would notice the steel, and then they would kind of, oh, and then it'd be and then I would jump in and say, oh yeah, if you would like to blah blah blah, look at the pieces, feel free. And then they would always see the price point, which was not dissimilar from what you were seeing on like art knife, Bowie knives, or hunters and stuff like that. And people would say, oh, that seems really expensive. Isn't it just a cooking knife? Isn't it just a chef's knife? And it took that happening over and over, and me trying to explain it to people. And I was like, what's going on here? And I realized that because culinary knives are ubiquitous in a way to our everyday life, they're seen so frequently, so often. So there's a definite relationship there that's very, I guess, maybe mundane or common, because of that frequency of engagement, that they aren't seen as highly valuable, versus understanding that the amount of work that went into making them is very similar to the amount of work that goes into making a quality hunting knife or Bowie knife or something like that. And making the steel is the same process. The forging is a very similar process often. And I wonder if you come up against that um, with scissors, especially, because the reality, and what I've come to learn and understand and know from you, is that scissors are incredibly nuanced.
Mhm.
And I never would have known and
And
thought about
almost
that.
impossible to retro-engineer. I mean, the things
Yeah,
that are going on, we handle scissors every day,
right,
but figuring out, even if you take them apart and look at them, it's
right.
really hard to figure out what it is that happens on the inside.
Right.
Um, I think that the point that you raise about communication and educating people is
Mhm.
really interesting.
Yeah.
But so I'm kind of on the periphery of the Endangered Crafts Association in the UK, and scissor making is one of
Oh,
the
wow.
red endangered crafts.
I didn't even
There's
know that
so
was a
few of
thing.
us. Yeah, there's so few of us still around that we're kind of on the red list of endangered crafts.
Right.
Along with, I don't know, lobster pot makers and
Mm.
sieve makers, and all sorts of
Oh,
weird and
wow.
wonderful
Sure.
crafts that are down to the last few people. But some of these crafts have had a resurgence. So did you realize that taxidermy has almost been entirely restored as a craft through middle-aged, middle-class women being
No,
involved in taxidermy?
I had no
So
idea.
previously, it was a male-dominated
Right.
field, and it was kind of a professional. And now there is this whole body of women who are coming at it in the middle of their lives. So they're already established a certain degree of financial independence.
Mhm.
They have that behind them, and they're now looking um, for a craft that feeds their soul,
Mhm.
that isn't just a source of income. So when we look at crafts within the UK, the chances of us getting 18-year-olds to become traditional apprentices within craft fields um, is tiny. It's minute. There are
Right.
very few 18-year-olds who are prepared to do that.
Mhm.
But people coming back into crafts in their middle age after having established
So
themselves in their
interesting.
careers,
Yeah.
and what they want is nice tools to do that.
Mm.
So they might be might be becoming weavers, or they might be becoming collage makers or taxidermists or all these other things.
Yeah.
And what they don't want is 3 for £1 scissors from IKEA.
Why?
Well, who'd have thought it?
There's a reason
Because
they're 3 for £1.
yeah, but they're starting to think about how, if their craft practice brings them pleasure,
Mhm.
how their tools contribute to that as well.
Absolutely.
And I think that there are some people who will never get over the 3 for £1 from IKEA scissors, and they will
Mm,
always think that anything more than that is just a waste of money.
mhm.
But there are increasingly, there is a community of people who really value beautiful tools, and they're not necessarily
Right.
professionals, but really enthusiastic hobbyists. And I don't think we should dismiss that. In the same way that I was talking about the kind of the validation of skills, I think that we really need to start valuing enthusiastic hobbyists and amateurists, because they end up with having their drivers are different, so they end up being very curious, and within a field they often drive research and development in a way that people who are having to earn a living from what they're doing just can't do. We just can't
Right.
set aside hours of quirky experiment not knowing where this is going to end up, in the same
Mhm.
way that somebody who doesn't have to pay their bills
Right.
with their practice can.
Yeah.
And if they're open about or even if they're not, you see somebody do this and you think that's really interesting, I'll give that a go. I now know that's possible. Means that it can spur on a community in a way that just people who are struggling to make ends meet
Mhm.
couldn't do.
Right. Yeah, I
So,
completely agree. I think a lot of people ask me so it's a lot of just professional chefs that are buying your knives, who are
mm,
using your knives, and I'm like, actually, it's not.
no.
There are some, but they're far and few between. The people that are buying my work are professionals by day, and after work, when they come home or on the weekends, when they
Yeah.
found that cooking is a creative um, outlet for them. They have the best pans, they have the best appliances, and having a great knife helps that experience, helps enhance that experience, so that because it is they're serving a function, they're making food for themselves,
Mm,
but at the same time, working double duty, that they are finding pleasure and enjoyment and finding a way to beat their own burnout from their professional daily job to enjoy making food. And so yeah, it's I can absolutely agree and
yeah.
see how that plays into your potential clients as well. And it's interesting the way you're talking about how, like, for the few that do take it on as a craft early on, I think, at least for me speaking, there is a place where it's like, I have time to make my knives, I have very little time for research, and the information that people who have maybe, I guess, essentially more effectively set themselves up financially to afford free time. I get a lot of very interesting information from them about culinary knives and materials and stuff like that. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's very cool.
Yeah.
Go
So,
ahead.
I mean, I was just going to say the other
Yeah.
thing that you raised about was people coming by your table,
Mm,
um, and this was one of the reasons why I started writing quite a lot of it. So when I go to a show, I try and have one showcase piece that is big enough to make people stop.
sure.
I try and have a technical piece that will make the other makers go, "Ooh,"
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, it's
Makes
like
me feel
showing
good.
off. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're one of the few people, like, nobody at home. I kind of like come home and I go, "Wow, I've got this amazing little gizmo that I've just," and everybody at home goes, "Yeah." So, if you can't have a little kind of bit of joy from the other makers going, "Oh, wow, that's amazing," then,
Yeah.
what's the point really?
Oh, that's so
Um,
cool. That's a great
and
idea.
then I also have the more pragmatic pieces that I they're either smaller or more numerous that I know that people will buy and hopefully use, but certainly are priced more at that kind of
Right.
point. But on the table as well, I also try and give people a bit of background information and text. And that was because very often, certainly early on, people would come up and do what Ed would call the double dog head, where they're kind of going, because they couldn't figure out what it was that I was
Right.
actually doing.
Yeah.
And I found that people would stop and read a body of text, particularly if the work that I've got in front of them is a little bit challenging.
Sure.
And then they would engage me in conversation in a way that they wouldn't necessarily do completely dry and off the bat. You know, they wouldn't go, "Why have you made that?" Like,
Mm.
because most people aren't rude enough to go, "What on earth were you thinking when you made
Right.
this?"
Right.
Whereas if I give them some text that they can read and engage with, they then have it's low risk, isn't it? They don't even have
Yeah.
to make eye contact with me. They can
Right.
read it and wander off, or they can read it and
Sure.
then look at me and go, but why did you choose something from this date? And
Mhm.
then that's a whole conversation. So they've already
Right.
been given key information that means that they're not starting the conversation completely uninformed, which nobody
Right.
likes feeling kind of
Sure.
uninformed. So
Well, and I
yeah.
feel like your table is one of few that I've seen little brochures
Mm.
of information on, which I absolutely adore. I think those are actually really great. And when you were talking about um, kind of lowering that bar of engagement so that they can kind of do it on their own, almost like I honestly I feel like your table, and I think a lot of people could benefit from seeing how you set things up and how you organize your table.
4A at Blade Show.
Yeah,
Come and say
everybody,
hi. Yeah.
always and forever. Yeah. Um, there's a lot to get from the way you're set up, like almost like it is a museum display
Hmm.
or an art gallery display, which I think
For the same reason.
a lot of people, yeah. So and so it invites you, if especially if a person has already had an experience of any kind walking through a museum or an art gallery, there's that kind of interpretive, I guess, element to it, and that's part of that is the descriptors or the brochures and
But I
information that you
know when I
provide.
go through a show that you just like there's table after table after
Right.
table, and you need something, and it
It's a
gets quite
lot.
exhausting. Yeah.
It's a
So
lot.
actually just being able to stop and
Mhm.
read a bit of information
Yeah.
is actually quite a relief from having to do that
Mhm.
engagement with the person behind the table all the time. I mean, there's a role for both of them, but
Yeah.
certainly just giving people a little bit of extra help that
Yeah.
means that they don't have to um, engage with you as a table holder all the time. It's just great.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was going to say, so I make books for my projects.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but some of the bigger projects actually go out to the collector with their own book that I've kind of
Oh,
compiled,
that's so
and
great.
it'll be they tend to be the larger projects. So the project I've got on next that I'm just about to start,
Yeah.
that will definitely have a book with it because it's such a
I believe it.
massive project. And as I said, you know, when you think of that iceberg of kind of a project and the artifact just being tiny little tip, you know, all that stuff that I've collated, all the research,
Mhm.
all my sketchbook pages, all the background information and the context, all
Yeah.
adds to the final artifact. And if I'm asking collectors to pay what I think is quite a large amount of money, I've got all that information anyway. So
Yeah.
I I like to get it out there. And again, it's another one of these avoiding burnout things.
Right.
So if I'm if I'm being if I was talking to somebody from a business school, I could probably swing it and say that I'm adding value to the end piece, but
Absolutely.
that's not
The
why I
added
do it.
value,
Yeah,
100%.
right. That's absolute bollocks, really. I mean, no, it is, but that's incidental, should I say? That the driver is definitely my own amusement, and it is for my you know, if it ever becomes a chore, I'm never going to do it.
Right.
If it's something that I want to do, if I want to make the boxes, if I want to make the books, then that's the driver as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
idea of adding value if I don't enjoy it, that would never happen.
Right. It's good that plays. It works. It works for both sides.
Mm,
It's something you do for yourself, but it also benefits
yeah.
the end collector. And I do think that added value, however or whatever you want to call it, that depth of information that you already have, you've already done all that research, like you said. I think it also, because these pieces that we create, part of the reason people are buying them isn't I mean, it could be part of it because they're really pretty or well executed, but I think they're almost curiosity pieces in a way, and to be able to have something to say about them
Mm,
is also, I think, humans are storytelling creatures,
mm.
and by helping to create a story around the thing and the information, and if you already have it, why not pass it on?
Mm.
That gives your customer that much more information to share and talk about when when somebody comes to their house, or they see it or they share it with somebody, then they have these things to talk about, and it helps to drive conversation and curiosity about handmade things, and I think there's
Can we
nothing
have a
wrong
look
with
at the
that.
project? Can we have a look at the
Yes,
project,
yes,
please?
yes. Okay, so she sent a bunch of pictures,
Did.
and I have it is quite. Let's see. I'm gonna get up here and do the screen share, and I
So this is
can't
a
remember
project
which one's the
been
first one. Yeah, go ahead.
running for a couple of years. This actually, I had to send you pictures from a sketchbook that is previous to my current one. It's
Okay.
so this is the definite 2-year project. A friend of mine bought this little thing in one of the Sheffield antique shops, and she showed it to me because it had a pair of scissors in it,
Uh-huh.
and it turns out that it was much more than just a pair of scissors. It's a little medical kit,
Oh,
and um, so
this probably is not the first
it
picture. I
probably
just
isn't the
realized.
first one, no.
I'm gonna hop
So
out to maybe this one.
yeah, yeah. So you can see there, everything laid on inside.
Yes.
So on the left, we have a pair of Spencer Wells forceps and a curved needle and suture thread. And
Hmm.
then on the right side, starting on the left, we have a two-bladed scalpel. Then we have a tweezers. Then we have scissors. Then we have a bullet probe. Then we have an abscess
Bullet probe.
drainer and an abscess lance. It's a
God.
First World War First
Yeah.
World War pocket medical kit,
Wow.
and
Okay.
it's all in a tin. And kid you not, I'm going to show you the size of the tin.
Okay. I'm gonna close this back down so we can get you back in here in the main. Oh, I'm gonna switch you.
This is the size of the tin.
Oh my gosh.
So it's only, I'm going to have to do it in inches, aren't
That's
I?
smaller than a deck of cards.
Yeah, it is. The tin is 3 inches by 2 inches.
Wow.
Tiny little tins.
It's
So
almost a 1, 2, 3 block.
yeah. So
But it's narrower.
I'm remaking. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's half inch, just over
Oh
half
wow.
inch.
Okay.
So I'm remaking these,
Yeah.
and the original was in nickel and steel, and the bullet probe was silver, and the abscess drainer was silver, and the abscess lance was gold-plated steel.
Right.
Just beautiful, and it just appeals to my tiny little mind. So the first thing I needed to do, instead of doing it out of nickel, I'm doing it out of silver. So the tin
Okay.
has, so I needed to make the tin, but in order to make the tin, I needed to make the press tool, which means that
Oh
I
wow.
needed to teach myself how to construct a press tool that I could use in a fly press to, and there are people who spend their entire professional life making press tools. So
Right.
yeah, there I go, just deciding that it's something that I could do myself.
Right, because it's not it's not like a box that's built up and silver soldered in all the
No,
corners.
it's pressed out.
Oh
And
wow.
then so my first job will be to do the hinge, to
Hmm.
solder on the hinge and the little catch. Now,
Wow.
the amazing thing about this is that it's completely disassemblable.
Oh
All the
wow.
scissors, all the scalpel, everything can be taken apart for sterilization.
Right.
So let's have a look at some other pictures. Go back to
Yes.
the
Let's see. Hop back.
main
And
screen. Okay, so no. Go. Okay, so see the blue one above the blue one, that one. Yep, up, that one.
okay.
Right, that was the original kit all laid out.
Oh wow.
So
Oh yeah.
so I'm going to have to make some scalpel blades.
Yeah.
And the great thing was that all the parts are numbered. And one of the first jobs I did was track down who makes them or who made the original. Turns out
sure.
they were a Sheffield
No.
manufacturer. Yep.
Yeah.
And I
Oh, I
got
see a
hold of.
name right there.
Yeah, well, that was the supplier, Young and Son.
Okay.
They supplied. They were based in Edinburgh, but they didn't manufacture. Gray and Son manufactured in Sheffield. Okay, so
Okay.
yeah, okay. So flip over to another picture.
Okay. Let's see. Let's see. This one.
No, that's just the case.
Okay.
Boring. That's just a drawing. Okay, I'm trying to find. So you can't see where I'm pointing. Okay, no, go right.
Okay.
Go right. Oh, that was me making tweezers. I've never made tweezers before. That was a whole thing in itself. Move along. Next one. So that one.
Okay. Glad you can see my screen.
Right. So this is an.
Oh wow.
This is the folding scalpel that was taken from their catalogue.
Oh my god, that thing's crazy.
So I found the catalogue, and it turns out that they were basically like a kit form. So you would get the box, and you would be told what numbers you would have in it for different. So for instance, if you were on the Indian medical midwife corps, right, you would have this and this in your tin. And if you were a cavalry officer, you would have this in your tin. So you could order from using the numbers that are in the catalogue a whole load of different tools and different medical equipment and that sort of thing to fill your case with. So it was you could make them, you could individualize your kit based on what your needs were. It's just lovely. So this catalogue, is dated 1921, I think, but the case that I have dates from the First World War, and they were making these cases all the way from about 1895, right up to kind of probably 1930s. But yeah, it's amazing. And I just love the idea of having all this information that, yeah.
Well, if this fits inside the tin, that means it's less than 3 inches. It's maybe 2.5 or 2 3/4 inches.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. I assume these are locking mechanisms on the side that help to lock them closed and in open positions.
Yep. They lock them shut, they lock them open, and then they pull out completely so you can take them apart for sterilizing.
Wow. That is so awesome.
So I've got to make all the tools. I'm making 3 of them, 3 tins with all the bits inside, including the needles, which will be exciting.
Yeah, those needles are quite fine.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see if I can go back to and the layout that you did on this one that we were just previously looking at. Let me pull it back up. It looks like maybe you've taken photographs and then printed them back out. And
yeah, so I use all sorts of methods of documenting and analyzing what I'm doing. So these aren't even photographs. I think these might even be photocopies. I just laid them on my flatbed photocopy. I took a photocopy of them, and what that means is that you get them full size and correct scale and everything. It's pretty cool.
Oh, interesting. The way the pivot works for the scissors,
Mm-hmm.
the captured only from one side, but because it's recessed slightly or
Yep.
chamfered,
Mm-hmm.
that's what
Yeah,
holds it
that's,
together.
I found the patent for that. That's called the grazer septic joint.
Raise a septic joint.
And I have the original patent application for that.
Well, it makes me curious. I'm so interested, or that's interesting to me because a lot of culinary shears are designed to come apart, but I've never seen that kind of a joint on one, and I wonder
It's
how
really
that would
cool.
work
I don't know
in
how
a
well it'll
hard
work on
use.
culinary scissors. I've now
Yeah.
got 3 different methods of taking scissors apart. So
So
yeah, if you're interested, I can send you the details of those.
yeah, so cool. Um, I I'm sorry, I'm just like that little kit is so unique and wild to me. Um, I'm having a hard time.
No.
Even just like the idea of this suture needles, the stitching needles for, yeah, for sewing somebody up.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think you won best of the rest. I think one of the first years I was at Blade Show, which was like 2015 and 2016, which you probably have won previously, but it was for, I believe, a sewing kit, or maybe it was a medical kit, medical tool kit, and I can't remember.
I can't either.
Perfect. I'm glad I just
Great.
killed the conversation.
Great.
um,
I've done best collaboration.
yes.
That was with Haley and
Oh yeah.
Delana and Audra. We did
Right.
a Ladysmith's knife, which was cool.
Absolutely.
Best miniature. That was my tiny pair
Oh
of
my
scissors.
gosh. Yeah. I'm gonna scroll
You're
through this.
right. Best of the rest, and I can't remember what that was, I'm afraid.
You did make those. Can you talk about those miniatures? Because at first I thought I knew what I was. I thought I had seen miniatures, and I thought I knew what miniatures were until I saw yours, and I was completely blown away at how not microscopic, but getting pretty damn close to it. These scissors were.
Right. So, yeah, these were tiny. So it started off a bigger project than this.
Okay.
So the first project that I did was this design of scissors, but 30 centimeters, 12 inches big.
Hmm.
And then, oh, I don't know whether I've got the wooden models around here, so it doesn't matter. And they, and I realized that I never get to keep any of my pairs of scissors. So I wanted to
Right.
make a small pair that I could wear as a necklace.
Oh,
And so I made them out of Damascus steel and carved them and loved them. But they were quite hard to do. I was working under the microscope, but they were quite challenging. So one
right.
of the techniques that I learned from a jeweler is that if you're struggling with something small, go smaller and have a sacrificial piece that you do that's even smaller. And then
Right.
when you work on that for an hour, and then when you go back to the piece that you're struggling with originally, it suddenly seems huge and completely manageable. So these were only ever meant to be a sacrificial pair that never came to anything, but they
Right.
just took on a life of their own. So
Right.
the smaller pair that I made for me fitted in the finger bows of the
Okay.
big pair.
Oh wow.
And then these fitted in the finger bows of my tiny pair. So
Oh
there
my
were
god.
3 pairs that fitted inside each other. And
Well,
these were heat treated, they
they
would custom
were.
hair. Yeah, they worked.
They're so
Um,
small.
it took me maybe somewhere between 13 and 15 goes to get them, to kind of get the process right.
Oh
And I
wow.
would lose them. I'd flick them across the workshop,
Oh.
or I'd
Yeah.
get them good and I burnt them up in heat treating.
Okay,
And
yeah.
then the next time I'd do them all again, and then I'd put them in heat treat foil, and then
Yeah.
I cut off the heat treat foil and cut through one of my
Oh no.
scissors. And then actually the next one of those was actually fine. I managed to heat
Mhm.
treat them and rivet them over and everything. But I gave up caffeinated coffee during this process because
Oh,
I
sure.
was working under the microscope all the time and I could see a hand tremor.
Right.
I kind of like, okay, yeah, that's not working. I'm going to have to sort that out. I was using a lot of watchmakers' burrs under the
Okay.
microscope,
Oh, yeah, sure.
tiny, tiny things.
Yeah.
And holding them was the biggest challenge. So what I'd do is I'd get a coffee stirrer,
Mhm.
a little wooden coffee stirrer, and I would super glue the parts to the wood, so I had a little handle to hold, and then
Right.
you'd be able to see it starting to shift, and you go, oh fuck, oh god, okay, and
Yeah.
you'd stop that and you'd turn it over, or I'd turn it over and I'd super glue it down again on the other side, and I'd
Yeah.
work it until I started to see it shift.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow. I can see how you can cut right through it because they're so small, the steel is essentially foil at that point.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There
Wow.
was a pair that I did that I decided were just too thin, so I'd kind of ground them away too much on the blade,
Yeah.
and they were hanging around in my, sketchbook for a while, and, oh, look, there's the tin, you can see the
Oh,
tin,
yeah.
that's the original tin.
Oh, you did a
Oh,
video.
I did a video, okay,
Yeah.
So if anybody's interested, go back and have a look. Oh, look,
Yeah,
there it is sitting
absolutely.
on the coffee stirrer above.
Another video. But yeah. Oh my gosh. They're so tiny.
Yeah,
That is incredible. Yikes.
yeah, really
But
tiny.
I can see what you mean though from from the jeweler's perspective. If something seems small, make a
Mm.
smaller version and then work on that and come back.
There you go. That's the set of 3, one inside each
Oh
other.
my god, I didn't even see the third one. Holy smokes, look at that. Oh my god, that's amazing.
Yeah, I get to do fun projects. I think, yeah. They do
And
take on a mind of their own at
yeah,
times, though.
that is amazing. This pair of scissors is actually one of my favorites that I've seen you make. And I love the curves and contours in the in I guess the extra details around, and I don't even know what those would call it, as well as the loops or ribbons, the
Finger bows. So you've
finger
got
bow.
finger bows and shanks going onto the blades.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
finger bows and shanks. Which I believe I'm gonna pull these up now. Is a finished photo of the actual thing. Of sorry, the biggest pair.
Mhm.
Yeah, these, and I did get to see these at Blade Show.
They were lovely. They were made out of wrought iron. So this was,
Absolutely gorgeous.
I got a friend of mine to forge weld on tool steel for the blades, and then the rest of
Mm,
it is just wrought iron that I then cut out. So,
right,
but that whole kind of like changing it from a flat shape into a 3-dimensional form,
right.
such good fun. That's all just
Dynamic.
filed out.
Yeah. Well, and even your file work, oh, sorry, let me get back in here again, is so clean that it's, unless you're looking really closely, it's hard to tell that it is. And it plays well, honestly, in
Mm.
this, with this material, the wrought iron. Um, yeah, it's just those details are insane to me.
And the gold balls, but it was just a really lovely piece to have that contrast between the rough, um, yeah, the rough wrought iron and the gold, shiny gold balls.
Mhm.
Lovely.
What is that called, a juxtaposition?
Mm, love it.
um, well, and I think what I love about the work that you do to contour it is it makes it very dynamic. And I think that's something that you do with shears and scissors that I feel like I've never really seen before, is a lot of this dynamic curvature. But then from following you, I see that there are a lot of historical representation of that kind of extra detail that goes into making shears like that.
Yeah, so when I look at the reports of trades in Sheffield
Hmm.
from kind of late 1700s up to the 1950s, scissor makers get divided into 2 types. So you get the common scissor maker and you get the fine and fancy. And they're very often using the same blanks, particularly from
Oh,
1850 onwards. Drop
yeah,
forged blanks were common, and they were expensive. So you wouldn't have got a huge number of them. If you just removed the flashing from the drop forgings
yeah.
and made the scissor bit work, you were considered a common scissor maker. If you then took that blank and started filing into it and changing it and making it fancy, you were labeled a fine and fancy scissor maker.
I see.
So I am a fine and fancy scissor maker.
You absolutely are.
Yeah.
100% fine and fancy, indeed. This is can you tell us about this set? This looks like it fits in the fine and fancy. It doesn't
Yes, it does.
necessarily.
It's French.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's it actually has a couple of interesting pairs of scissors in there. The one on the right is has mother of pearl handles, and then gold. Now you have to. These would have been hand forged,
Okay.
even though they're so tiny, and they would, because they're from around 1760, something like that, probably. Okay. And then on the left of them is a smaller pair of scissors that were commonly called little monsters, and that's to do with the proportion of them, so that they have this very short shanks, and they're called the petit monstre, which is kind of cool. This was very common around that period, that you'd have these sewing sets, and it was mainly, particularly in the French court, you would have been expected to have taken this kind of something to do, so that you had when you were chilling with friends in social situations, you would be sewing at the same time. Oh, there is a dirty secret of around the same time.
Okay, let's hear it.
That textile restorers and historians absolutely hate with a passion. A little bit later than this, and it was lace making was expensive. Lace was expensive, and embroidery was expensive. So very often, it got passed down from garment to garment. So you'd remove it from one piece and you would apply it to another. And textile historians love this because they can trace back through how things might have been passed down and that sort of thing. Okay. But there was a period of time where, and the kind of, as particularly within the French and the English court, when turn of the 1800s, where kind of embellishment got even more, they would use fine silver and gold thread within the embroidery in order to make it stand out in the candlelight. And it was obviously something that was very, very fancy and very considered of high status, but they would have had to have used pure gold and pure silver thread in order to not have it tarnish.
Right.
Okay. There was a period of time, and it was one of the kings, I'm going to go blank on this one now. One of the kings made it popular in the courts to unpick the gold and silver thread from these pieces of lace. Yeah. And it was called drizzling. So some of these sets aren't actually sewing sets, but they are destructive sets instead. They have little knives with them, little scissors, and little needles and pins that you could unpick, tease out all the gold and silver thread, to the point where I think he was from the Netherlands. He managed to separate out so much silver thread from various kind of bits of royal kind of robing, that he gave Queen Victoria a piece of tableware made from all the silver that he'd collected over the years, which is just like a cooling dish or something like that. Really weird. But there is a report of a Prussian, a member of the Prussian army, who had been sitting in the French court listening to a concert, and to his utter horror, the two women behind him were unpicking his gold embroidery embellishment from his uniform while he was sitting there in the concert.
Oh my gosh.
They were unpicking the gold off his uniform.
That's amazing. And I'm seeing, I feel like, so is this kit, this is a kit like that's used for that?
No,
Because I see a
this
pick,
is,
I see a knife.
yeah.
No.
No, this would have probably just been a lady's
Okay.
kit, personal. It might be. There's no sewing stuff there.
Well, I see a thimble, I
Mm,
see a bottle that
yeah.
maybe had needles in it.
Yeah, it could
Um,
well have been. They
but
tended to be a little bit smaller and a little bit more discreet, so you could carry
sure.
them in your handbag. But if you see a kit that has a pair of scissors and a little knife
Yeah,
and what looks like a bodkin and like a bottle to store all, because what would often happen is that the gold and silver thread would break away.
sure.
So you'd need a pot to store it in. If you
Uh-huh.
see that and no sewing needles, it's almost certainly not a productive, not something that would have been to produce something, but to have picked
I
away at the
I
gold
see.
and silver thread
Mm,
from yeah.
that's wild. Well, and you incorporate some details of fine metal, non-ferrous metals, gold and silver wire.
Mm.
I have an example here into your scissor making that I feel like it definitely adds to that fancy scissor making label.
Yeah,
But can
so
you talk about some of this?
this was a project that I did when I saw a lot of the scissors that I was seeing at the time were um, meant to replicate lace
Mhm.
work. And I wondered whether it was possible, instead of carving away material to pretend to be lace, could I make lace out
Oh.
of iron? So this is iron thread,
Oh,
iron
okay.
wire that I've made into lace.
Yeah.
Um, and so I had to teach myself how to make bobbin lace, and then I had to
Oh
teach
my
myself how
gosh.
to do it out of wire, and then I had to do the. I mean, the whole design of this piece was designed to be protective, so that it would protect these very delicate
Right.
inserts, and then it was bound on with 24 karat gold wire, which.
Oh, wow. Oh, I see the difference in the color now.
Mm.
That's so
So the
funny. At
lace
first, I thought it
itself
was all
is
gold.
iron.
Yeah.
And then it would have been easier actually for me to have done the lace out of gold, but it would have
Sure.
been more fragile. It would have been more vulnerable
Right.
to damage. Whereas this pure iron wire,
Oh, I see. Because as you're kind of braiding it and twisting
yeah,
it
you can
and
burn
through
it
itself.
and harden it and
Yeah.
twist it down.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a crazy piece. Um, yeah. I love that one.
I had another element of pressure on that one, in that David Jerome had asked me whether I would do a project and document it for one of his books.
Oh,
And I said that I would do that one. But I told him at the time, like, I really like high risk making. If I know that I can make a piece,
yeah.
then there's almost no point in me making it. I like the fact that there's an element of me actually not being able to complete it.
Sure.
Um, so I told this to him, but I don't think he'd really understood that I might not be able to make iron lace and get it to work how I wanted it to. And he was
Uh-huh.
so I was documenting it as I was going along, and we were getting closer and closer to the deadline, and I was breaking more and more pieces, and I was going,
Oh my
I
God.
really don't know whether it's going to get there. In
Yeah.
the end, it did, and it was fine. But I think both of us were increasingly nervous towards the end.
Yeah. Um, I feel like so I don't know why this is popping in my head right now, but I feel like so I do coffee etching. Coffee etching is a very popular thing these days. Um, I might be part of that problem. I'm not quite sure, but the first time I heard about coffee etching was from Adam DeRogers, who said that he has a friend over across the water, over in Europe, that uses coffee to etch blades for contrast, but he never said who it was. And I think it was just like a passive comment, because we were talking about, we didn't really get into the details, because I don't know if he even necessarily had any details. And it was afterwards, I was just like, oh, that's interesting. I never really thought about trying to etch steel and other kinds of solutions. And I never really came back to it. But then after a few months, I tried to do some research, trying to find some information. I couldn't find anything. And so I just started with coffee. But somebody said that you might have been the originator of the
No,
coffee etching. Okay.
no. I learnt it from one of the continental Europeans at
Okay.
Hanks one year.
Okay.
So one of the Vikings, and I can't remember offhand who it was.
Oh, one of the Vikings.
Mm.
Interesting.
So like from Sweden or
Okay.
up there.
Okay.
Yeah. I know. I love it. I think it's great. I use it all the time. Um I don't even etch in acid to start with. I just go straight into the coffee.
Right.
And even then, I find that I have some topography, and as
Right.
much topography as I would want.
Right.
I know that there are people who will etch it for topography first and then go into the coffee. But
Yeah.
I mean, I use 15N20 and 1085. That's kind
Mhm.
of like, I love that. I know that. I know it works.
Right.
And it just shows up the coffee etch so beautifully. And
Absolutely.
from my point of view, um, I love mixing domestic with industrial, and the fact
Okay.
that I can finish my pieces down the workshop, bring them home, and etch them in coffee while I'm cooking dinner
Right.
is kind of, it really appeals to me. You know, that
Absolutely.
idea of, yeah.
Yeah, well, and I think part of the reason it appealed to me, was the idea that the finish etching could be done, with a solution that essentially would is considered
Food
food
safe.
safe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think in general, as long as the blades are properly neutral, the acids, that the blades are being etched in are properly neutralized, that they should still, relatively speaking, I
Mm.
don't know that I don't think there's any research around it, but they should be food safe.
Mm,
But knowing that after finding trying the coffee etch and finding that it worked,
yeah.
um, was very excited about the idea that I had a food safe method for etching my blades, and it's a thing that clients could potentially replicate in their own homes without having to have a bunch of ventilation and proper equipment, and they could just heat up some coffee and dip the
Yeah.
blade in it, and
Eric
they can
Markman.
bring it back.
Eric Markman. It's
Eric Markman.
yeah. Now, where he got it from, I don't know. We
Oh,
should track it back.
now I gotta chase him down. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
gonna add a note right here. Eric Markman, the Vikings. Okay. And so cool.
Yeah,
All right.
I mean, I
But,
don't mind that that
yeah,
the etch on mine is quite shallow,
yeah,
because I like the idea that over the years of being used, you'll get the worn highlights of your hand use.
right,
That really appeals to me.
sure.
Um, yeah.
Well, and I like it because I do the same thing. I mean, I guess it depends on the project.
Mm,
But I was just even refurbishing a knife. A customer sent it back. It was an early knife, and at the time I was etching deep for contrast, or etching for topography on the surface,
mm,
and then I think kind of the understanding or the common practice at the time was that that depth helps to hold some of the contrast, the color, especially the black, because the black
mm,
will etch deeper than the 15 and 20. And I had forgotten how deep I was etching those blades, and so I put the blade through regrinding, rehand finishing, and everything, and I just went straight into the coffee, and it came out great high contrast with almost zero topography. I've gone back and forth and playing with it hot. I started out hot, and then was struggling with consistency, got more consistency at cold, but I've also started now exploring hot again, thanks to my friend Gabe Fletcher, who's one of the sponsors here. Um, and getting really good results, manageable results that are durable enough that I can scrub them really hard with a sunshine cloth or even buff it. But the reason I like that it's so shallow is that if we want to kind of go back to the idea that my knives are going to be something that lasts for multiple generations, of course, they're going to be sharpened, and eventually at some point they need to be rethinned. And when the blade gets reground, then it needs to be refinished. And if I'm using a more caustic or more aggressive acid, wherever it's not getting reground, especially around the bolster or on the spine or something like that, that is going to continue to etch deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper every time. But with the coffee, if you have to do coffee every few years, or
Yeah.
just because people want it to look pretty, or
Mm.
every few years because the blade actually has to be rethinned, it's contributing very little to almost no topography while still
Yeah.
achieving that contrast. And
Mm.
so I don't know if Adam got it from you or if he got it from Eric in conversations, but whoever, I
Yeah.
thank you.
And I've no
um
idea where that came from. You know, it's fascinating, isn't it? Who
right.
thought that that would work? But I mean, sometimes I do it and it's almost too black and white.
Oh,
You know, it's almost too striking,
sure,
because I find that I have to be careful, particularly on my little pieces,
sure.
that the if I've done quite a lot of shaping or kind of carving on them,
Right.
that you lose some of that three dimensionality, because the Damascus pattern overrides your eye looking over all of
Oh,
them.
that's such an
So,
interesting point. Yeah, no, absolutely, you're right.
mind you, I've got another problem this
Okay.
time. Okay, so have a look at the ones that I've just done, the scissors that I've just done. I think I sent you a picture,
Are you
and
wanting the
they're
little
all
cigar?
black. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay, I actually had that one queued up. Perfect. Okay, all
yeah.
black.
So this one, actually, that's been lightened,
Okay.
visually been lightened. That's a cigar pair of scissors. There's a picture with like multiple of these little black
Okay, yeah,
scissors.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Let's see. Which one is it? Sorry. Let's see.
so-
Maybe. Maybe
oh,
it got sent and I
yeah.
haven't pulled it in
Okay.
yet. I'll dig around for that. But okay, so what's going on with the black with that?
Yeah. So this is a black that I kind of got turned on to at New England School of Metalwork last October.
Okay.
And this is a black that is particularly on the surface finish that I'm using, which is generally a very fine diamond burr, which I
Okay.
love. It's so velvety black that it makes them almost look like holes in my little white
Oh,
displays. So I remember maybe 25 years ago at Paris Knife Show, I was one of the guys who had a table was a Japanese maker. He's making folding knives,
hmm.
and he he did true mirror polishes on his knives. Now, a
Ah,
lot of knife makers say
yeah.
they mirror polish their knives, and they don't. This
Right.
guy really did properly mirror polish his knives, and they were so polished that they were nearly invisible. Yeah,
Oh,
this is the
wow.
picture I'm after.
Yeah.
So the problem was that as you looked around, he didn't get any kind of people stopping by his table, or at least not the
Oh,
sort of
no.
amount that you would think, because you couldn't see them. They had no presence because they were camouflaged in the reflections of the room.
Right.
Now, these almost had the same problem
Yeah.
in that they were so black that unless you picked them up and looked at them, you couldn't see the forms that I mean, I filed all these in. So
Yeah.
I think next time, this is lessons learned, isn't it?
Yes.
I'd like to rub the top surface a little bit just to take it back to make to mimic the wear that I anticipate them getting over the
Oh,
years,
wow.
so that you can see the kind of the three-dimensional carving that I
Yeah.
did on them. But I thought that was fascinating. We learn every time we do a project, we learn a little bit more, don't we?
Yeah. And
So
these
these are
go ahead.
little monsters at the top.
Little monster. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Why were they called little monsters?
because of their strange proportions,
I see.
that they have
Oh,
these
they're like
tiny
giant
little blades
eyes.
and yeah, well,
Yeah.
not giant eyes, tiny little shanks and tiny little, because this is only like they're only an inch and a half long. Well,
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Oh, geez.
uh,
That
yeah,
is
tiny, 2 inches long,
crazy.
maybe, tiny.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so okay, sorry. I was really like focused in on the black and how. So again, the black. This is a method that you got from the New England School of Metalwork.
Yeah, they it's just a a chemical that you can use on
Right.
them, but they're just so beautifully velvety black, and
Right.
particularly
Yeah.
on a slightly textured surface, like
It,
I have,
yeah. It seems to
you end
hold
up with
right.
this very matte, very velvety black. But
Yeah. They look like
it's lovely.
they make me think of like a conspiracy of ravens
Yeah,
or a murder
uh,
of crows.
yeah.
Just all this black.
These are so sometimes I'm historically inspired and I kind
Okay.
of do modern interpretations of historical pieces, like
Yeah.
my medical kit. I would
Right.
then it's not an exact replica, but it's certainly heavily based on it. Sometimes I do completely new stuff,
Hmm.
and sometimes I do direct replicas of old stuff. And this is a body of work that is a direct. These are
Oh,
direct
okay.
replicas of old pieces. I've got a pattern book of drop forged blanks,
Yeah.
and it's a catalogue of hundreds of pages of these designs, but
Yeah.
just the outline that you would get from a die.
Uh-huh.
And I've scanned and digitized some of them, and then I've made them. Now, it's interesting because you think that you get a lot of information from that, and you do, but making them up gives you a whole additional layer of information. So,
Oh,
for instance, these cigar scissors, if I made them again, I would make them thicker. I don't think I made them thick enough, but
okay.
also I would make them 10% bigger. These were the size that they were in the catalogue because the catalogue had them full size. But I think for a modern market, these are too small.
Okay.
Um, so, yeah,
So
I'd make them
we're
10% bigger and about 30% thicker, chunkier.
well, that also brings it, which kind of goes back into the research aspect of things. Like, what kind of cigars were people smoking? Like, where were they sourced from? That I've seen cigarellos that are tiny
Mhm.
little guys, all the way to giant Honduran or Cuban size
Yeah, well, they
Cuban
must have been
cigars.
small because
Yeah.
they were tiny little delicate
Right.
cigar scissors. Oh, I know. I remember what the best of the rest was.
Okay.
That was a cigar scissors. That was cigar scissors that I made years ago. So that was a pair of scissors based on an old pattern, and
Hmm.
it was like a multi-tool. So it had the scissors, and it had a pricker, and it had a match striker, and it had the little moons to cut the tip off.
Right.
But it also had an integrated blade, folding pocket knife blade on the blade of the pair of scissors.
So I'm pretty sure that that's the one ended up using in the calendar. I
Yes.
might be
Yeah.
mistaken
Yeah.
though.
Yeah. That'd
Okay.
be it.
For some reason, I'm not finding it in there, but I'm pretty sure it's this one.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that was cool because that was one of the first projects that I did using my wire EDM
Mm,
process.
okay.
So the problem that I have with Damascus steel is
Yes.
that if you take two halves of your scissors, you can never get the patterns to match up.
Right.
So if you take them out of two different parts of the billet. So I had this eureka moment that I realized that instead of cutting two halves and grinding away the material,
Uh-huh.
if I got my wire EDM guy to cut me out an entire profile and then slice down the middle where the cutting it blades were,
Yeah.
then all I had to do was remove a little bit of machining and then reassemble them. And then all the Damascus matches up.
Right.
So it matches up across the blades and everything. So these were done that way, including the little folding blade.
Right. We're gonna
It's
sneak
hard to
in here.
see on the it didn't this Damascus pattern didn't do that process justice.
Okay.
Which is a little bit sad, but it did prove it did prove the technique worked. This
Right.
felt like a full circle though, because originally I intended to make scissors to go into my knives, and on this one I made a knife to go into my scissors, which was really cool.
Yeah. No, and
Yeah.
I think what really I loved about this piece is that it just seemed so out there and unusual. And actually, up here in the folder, I think you must have used the EDM. It looks like the pattern kind of seems to match up. Maybe I'm mistaken.
Yes. So in fact, on this one, what I did was it matches up when the blade is open
Uh-huh.
rather than when it's shut,
Okay.
which I wouldn't do again. I'd do it so it matched up when it was shut.
I
But
see.
then all these layers, like the layer of the spring and the blade,
Right.
came off the same billet as the blades underneath and everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was,
This is a really wonderful piece. I
yeah.
love it so much.
The calligraphy scissors, I don't know whether you've got those. They're like the triangular calligraphy scissors, probably show that technique a little bit better.
Calligraphy. I don't know if I'm familiar with your calligraphy scissors. Here, I'll share the folder I have of your stuff, and then we'll see if I have it in this folder that I pulled up of stuff I downloaded.
Yes. Okay, so second row down on the far left. It might not be the best. Yeah.
Because they're closed in this example.
Yeah, but you can see on that the pattern goes from one side to the other on the finger bows.
So we do have I do have another one, I believe, of those. Oh shoot, I thought I did. Of those open. It must be over right here.
I'm sorry, all those pictures I sent. Oh, there we go. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And what's cool, along the edge, you can see the twist. I just noticed that.
So they match up across the thickness as well as from side to side as well.
Yeah.
So
well, and what's interesting too, I'm noticing about at least the side that's facing upward when the scissors are open, is that it's hollow in there.
Really hollow. That's a very traditional way of handling the inside of blades on Persian calligraphy scissors from the 18th century.
Right.
And that was for weight, for reducing weight. Really hollow.
Yeah. So what does that mean? Oh, is that for pens?
Actually, it would have been in what we would consider scribe sets these days.
Okay.
So that they have this really long, thin profile, and they look very dagger-like. And sometimes they have two bows, one behind each other rather than side by side.
Okay.
And that very slim shape was designed because they would have been used in a tool roll with brushes and inks that would have all rolled up together, which... Yeah. And at the same time, so this is one of the great things about thinking about how different cultures have handled different things over the years. So if we think about the calligraphy scissors in Persia of that time, they've got very hollow grind, and they're very ornate. We've got some really beautiful examples, gold, Kofgari, and a whole load of, because scribes and calligraphers would have been in the employment of rich, like this, of rich patrons, and they would have expected their scribes to have had tools that reflected their status. So we've got some really beautiful examples. You can see the very hollow on the inside of these.
Wow.
Yeah. Very light, very, very delicate, because you could remove a lot of material and still maintain rigidity through the cross-sectional geometry. Now, at the same time, scissors were being produced in Spain, and they have flat grinds. So I've got a couple of pairs of Spanish scissors. One of them is dated 1720 something, and they are very much heavier, because they haven't got that hollow grind. They've just got a flat grind.
Right.
So, but they're still designed for the same thing. They have quite a slim profile. But what the designers have done there is, behind the finger bows, they have an ornate bit of decoration, and that's to act as a counterweight.
It's a counterbalance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So cool. I love following your page because of all the historical stuff you share. There's just so much interesting. And again, the scissors, I think a lot of people don't really offer scissors, unfortunately, a second thought, because I feel like they're just so ubiquitous, but they are such incredibly nuanced tools.
Yeah, and we're so used to expecting one pair of scissors to do everything these days.
Right.
And I mean, Victorians, love them or hate them, what they did do is a whole load of really specialist tools for the job.
Yeah.
Sometimes an over amount of specialization, which, funnily enough,
Yeah.
was specifically encouraged by the Sheffield cutlery industry. So they went out of their way to encourage this micro specialization, particularly on things like tableware, so knives and forks, in order to generate business. So, you know, people would want to have, instead of just having a standard knife, fork, spoon, well, you now need an oily fish knife, fork set, and you need a white knife, fork set. And you know, this kind of, and you need a grapefruit spoon, and you need you know, so this was to generate interest and a desire to buy Sheffield cutlery.
Right. I'm just pulling up this picture, not necessarily to completely shift gears, but I would like to talk about some of your other creative work.
Ah, yes.
Tell us what's happening here.
This was kind of where where to start. A few years ago, quite a long time ago, actually, maybe 20 years ago, I fell into corset making.
Okay.
And by that, I kind of mean, well, I'm not going to get into the history of women's undergarments, but there was a period of time where we were no longer using whalebone or wood to support the garment, but we're then using springs and steels. So the structure that goes on inside a corset is quite fascinating. So the structure, the shape of the garment, the shape that is that shapes the body is all down to the textiles that you're using. It's not, you know, all the steel is doing is stopping all the fabric from crumpling down into the waist. And this whole idea that you could map and change a body through changing the panels, it's like engineering. So I ended up making a whole load of corsets and bras for models to wear in photo shoots, and that was just getting commissioned to make these one-off pieces. Was just such a pleasure, because again, I could almost make them as extravagant as I liked. And I just and I ended up doing shoes as well for this is actually a 3-piece, so the bra is separate from the corset, separate from the underskirt.
And you made this whole thing, or just the corset?
No, the whole thing, everything but the gloves.
God, really?
Yeah,
that's astonishing.
And the shoes, but you can't see the shoes underneath there, but you know. Damn
it.
And the great thing about the shoes is that they don't well, I mean, I sometimes make functional shoes, but if all she's doing is standing there, then
I'm trying to see. You do have a post somewhere about some shoes that you made. But yeah, it's just it's incredible, because I grew up with my mom doing a lot of needlework and sewing and making, and I actually I credit her, I think, for my, and maybe some of it is like whatever heritage or genetic, whatever you want to call it, is in the blood. But seeing her cut out all these panels and then sew them, and just watching what was basically raw materials become something useful was so amazing to me, because it really goes through a complete transformation that is unexpected. And at least for me, like, I could see, and she would get the patterns, and you could see the illustrations on the pattern and stuff, and like, how is that going to happen? And seeing her go through the whole process was really incredible.
And also, when I think about my projects, you know, are they so there's this whole debate, you know, is it art, is it craft, is it design? And I know that people kind of are very kind of, oh, it's an art knife, or, you know, I'm just a craftsman. This kind
Sure.
of, and there's this strange hierarchy again of art at the top and craft, or design next maybe, and then craft at the bottom.
Right.
And when I think of my projects, you know, some of them are art projects, some of them are craft projects, and some of them are design projects. And really, the only way that I can break them apart is by what was the initial instigation for me to do the project. So if I'm telling a story or wanting to kind of embody a concept or that sort of thing, then I would call that an art pair of scissors. It might not look like that. Somebody coming to it cold might not be able to see that.
Right.
But if that was like my twisted seamstress scissors, then I would definitely call those an art pair of scissors. If I'm wanting to fulfill a need, so somebody comes to me and they say, I want something very specific, and give me a whole load of parameters, then I would call that a design project.
Okay.
But if my project is driven by material or process, and my desire to either explore or kind of push the limits of that, then I would consider it a craft project, because craft fundamentally, I mean, I have some students come to me and they say, you know, I'm going to make this. What are you going to make it out of? I don't know. I haven't decided. How can you even think about what it is that you're going to be making when you don't know what you're going to be making it out of?
Right.
So the whole thing about corsets and also shoes is exploring. It gives me the opportunity to explore the various characteristics of the material, like how stiff can I get it? Can I back it on another material so I have stiffness and this, and as it comes off the stiffness and becomes a drape, how does that happen? You know, how can you, if you do 8 seams of layers of seaming, then it suddenly becomes rigid, and changing its characteristic into something that, I just love that experimentation. And my boxes are all made, well, not all of them, but a lot of them are made using glove leather, which is an incredibly mobile, flexible, stretchy leather. So it's only 0.5 millimeter thick, which is like the same thickness as a lot of bookbinding leathers. But unlike bookbinding leathers, which are dimensionally quite stable but rip very easily, glove leather is stretchy and it's mobile, and what it means is that I can use it to cover these boxes and go into the cavities on the inside, and you get all that 3-dimensional and kind of everything that fits perfectly, and there are no seams involved.
Wow.
Because it's all one piece.
Yeah, and I think I might have an example here. This is the glove leather.
That is the glove leather. That's actually a mixture of glove leather and bookbinding leather. So on the outside it's bookbinding leather, on the inside it's glove leather. But you had an example earlier of the pair of scissors that I just made. This is glove leather. But you can see the internal form of that fits the piece.
Which I don't even understand. You must be carving the material to fit it.
Yeah, so the underlying structure is balsa very often. Balsa wood. These are glove leather.
Is it the one that was a cigar?
Yeah.
Scissors inside the box. Let's go find those real quick. They are over here. Oh, there's actually, I think, a few of them. But yeah, I'll pull this one up and do this share with it. And I also have your twisted seamstress as well.
Yeah, so you can get it really deep into the cavities, and it's just a beautiful material to work with.
Yeah.
And it looks like velvet, but it's not. You know, it's leather. Oh, and the other great thing about it.
So amazing. So that's the leather. That's because most leather has a rough side and a smooth side, right? And this is, I totally thought this was velvet. Oh my God. That's great.
I have the skin here that I use for that.
Wonderful. Oh my God.
And it's just so stretchy and so cool. Yeah, it's just lovely stuff to work with.
Yeah. So people listening and not watching the video, so you see this blue panel inside of what looks essentially like the cover of a book, and it opens up to this blue with the scissors nested inside, um, and it's the leather. It's the glove leather that's fit into these different contours and shapes that are in there to help. I think one to make it easy to pull the scissors out, but two just like add to some of the overall aesthetic of the finished product. It's really great. That's so cool. Very nice.
And then I use the so yeah, that's another example of it, and that also had the glove leather on the outside of the box, so I
Okay.
could stretch a single piece all the way around, so there aren't any seams on the outside of
That's
it.
so interesting. I've never heard of that.
I know.
I love it.
I taught Haley. Oh no, I did teach Haley how to do it, or showed Haley how I do it, and then also taught Van and Delana how
Oh
I,
yeah,
how
sure.
I do it as well.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pull up the twisted seamstress too. Since
That sheath was made out of glove leather.
Okay. Oh, let me back it out actually real quick. So essentially it looks like, oh, the sheath looks like a corset and leggings.
Yeah.
And then the knife, the scissors, I almost said the knives, the scissors inside. They have this twisting and file work. Oh, and it's twisted Damascus. I'm just realizing too.
This too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the it's interesting how the Damascus. I'm just looking because it has almost kind of guard. It's like designed almost like a dagger, where it would have a cross guard just before the pivot. But those are integral to the rest of the. Sorry, I can't remember the anatomy from the bows.
Shanks and the bows.
The shanks. Yeah. Amazing. So great. And very creative. I love your creative mind. That like I feel like that works perfectly, but I never would have thought of that. But because of your background or your experience in other places, you're seeing how you can blend those different design qualities together,
and also how far I can push something.
Sure. Yeah.
And then every time I think I've pushed it as far as it'll go, I see a historical example and I think, okay, I'm nowhere near as crazy as some other people historically.
Right.
And okay, I know I sent you a picture of this. I have an historical example of that, and that
Oh yeah.
So a year ago, over a year ago, a big collection of knives came up for sale down in London in Sotheby's, and it was an author of a book who wrote Heritage of English Cutlery or something like that.
Okay.
Amazing book. I didn't realize that almost all the pictures in the book were from his own collection, and he must have died because the collection was being sold off en masse down in London. Wow. And it was a fascinating auction to watch, and they gave lots of information of each piece, not only the information that was in the book, but some additional information as well, which was just great.
Yeah,
there were only a couple of lots that I was interested in, and I was saving myself for the big one that I really wanted. And my computer went down just when bidding happened, and I missed out on it. I did not get it. Somebody else won it. And I then spent a year trying to track down who bought it and finding out whether they'd be prepared to sell it to me. And it is a scissor sword. And about 6 weeks before Blade Show this year, somebody sent me a picture and went, "Have you ever seen anything like this?" And I went, "Yes, please tell me that you took that picture, you know where they are, and you know who owns it." And he went, "Yeah, I do. Would they sell it to me?" And it turns out, finally, I got this it like 3 times as much as I would have if I had to pay much more than I would have otherwise. But I finally got it and brought it back to Sheffield. This is a scissor
Amazing.
sword made
Bring it back
by a
again.
gentleman called George Oates, and it was made for the Great Exhibition in 1851.
George Oates. Okay.
And he was a scissor maker. He probably, so stuff for the Great Exhibition was a wonderful opportunity for Sheffield, particularly Sheffield craftsmen, to instead of churning out stuff by the thousands, they were then asked to do the finest of their fine pieces to really showcase their skills.
Yeah.
And this would have probably been displayed alongside other kind of elaborate scissors, but more sensible scissors. So by 1851, this is the height of Victorian folly. There was no need for swords anymore, certainly no practical reason. And it doesn't function particularly well as a sword, and it doesn't function particularly well as a scissors. But by God, it's the most spectacular exhibition piece.
Yeah, wow. Oh my God. And the patterning on the blade, how is that happening?
Etched.
It's etched. Okay. So is it some sort of like a wax-based resist? And then the steel is exposed? Okay.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how inside the hilt, it still has the finger bows.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love how they incorporated that.
Actually, when I cleaned it, I had to clean it up a little bit, and you can tell that it's hollow ground on both all external sides for the sword, but also hollow ground on the inside of the scissors as well.
Right.
So every facet of that is hollow ground.
Amazing.
Just keep going up to the top of the scissors. Okay, so it looks like one of them is broken, but it isn't. It isn't. You probably can't see from this picture, but it dovetails under the tip that's been left on the other side of the blade, so that it kind of like clicks in underneath it, and means that, because you can imagine if you stabbed somebody, there's every chance that your two blades would splay out as you kind of like stab them, whereas this makes sure that tip is robust.
Robust tip and a single entry point. So then this would be more like a fencing sword.
Maybe. I don't know, but it's huge. You know, it's full size. Yeah.
Yeah. How long is it?
Over 4 foot.
Oh my God.
So it's massive thing. Lovely. And then I had to bring it back into the UK.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God. How was that?
Smuggled back in. Nobody stops a middle-aged woman. I walked funny for a week. I'm joking.
Cheeky. You are cheeky. That's funny. Oh my God. Wild. And so you just had it in your suitcase and no problem. Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Yeah. I'm so glad.
I know.
And then it must have been somebody in the state. I'm so curious because I'm seeing who the photographer was. And
yeah, I had that photograph. So the person who I bought it from wasn't the person who bought it in from auction.
Okay.
So it had gone through 2 other people before it got to me.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah. And then you brought it from the UK to the US?
No, I picked it up in the US. It was over there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Whoever the buyer was American.
I got you.
So it just went for a quick 1-year trip over to America, and then it got rudely yanked back to the UK, where it's now going to stay forever.
Yeah, forever. That is
did its little trip, little holiday abroad, and now it can come back.
That's incredible. It really is, because like, does anything like that exist?
Never seen anything like it. So Sheffield museums are really interested in borrowing it for an exhibition.
Oh, fun. How do you feel about that?
Oh, fine. Yeah.
How does that even work?
Yeah, they'll borrow it for a set exhibition. I just think it's great. The more people see that sort of thing, the better.
Interesting. I have a question for you about
Hmm.
sharpening scissors and shears
Yes.
because I offer sharpening service,
Mm.
but and I know that the scissors are not, or I would assume the scissors are not sharpened at the same angle that most conventional knives, whatever they are, would be sharpened at. And it's because it's kind of a chisel, almost kind of a chisel grind. It's not sharpened from both sides, it's sharpened from one side. Refining that and polishing away burr is tricky. And I was curious if you have any
Yeah.
insights that you'd
Yeah,
be
I
willing to
do.
share.
Okay.
Okay.
So, okay.
Okay.
It depends whether we're talking about hairdressing scissors or general purpose scissors.
Hmm.
Now, hairdressing scissors, hairdressers like having their scissors dismantled completely,
Okay.
and I would absolutely not recommend that you do that unless you have the proper setup for it.
Okay.
But general purpose scissors, you can sharpen from the outside.
Hmm.
And by the outside, I mean this angle here. Don't
Yeah.
ever touch this side
Right.
here.
Okay.
So I would just Sharpie along this edge so
Yeah.
that you can follow the grind that's actually there. And
Yeah.
very often I'll just be using a stone
Oh,
and set it up. And I'm just using a scalpel handle, ignore
sure.
this. And then just following whatever angle is put on there, and you stone along the edge until you get a burr along this internal side.
Okay.
And then this is the tricky bit. Then when you've done both sides, as you shut them, you push the two blades apart so they don't touch. And then as you bring them open, the burr will come off. So you do that a couple of times,
No.
and
Okay.
then you'll not have a burr. If you just did that and shut them, you'd
Yeah.
chonk down onto the burr, and then you
Right.
get a divot in your scissors. There you
Right,
go.
because you've just refined that edge and that burr is then getting shoved vice versa. Actually, the double burr is shoving into each other.
Now,
Hmm.
scissors are really soft
Yeah.
compared to knives. They definitely are. So
Yeah.
actually, in general, everyday wear, they hone against each other on that internal surface.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that
So
makes
they
sense.
don't need as much sharpening as a knife would,
Hmm.
having the same amount of wear, because as they rub against each other, as they cut things, it's only when they start cutting abrasive things like paper
Right.
and hair, and mainly hair because of the products that we put in them,
Right.
that you have to sharpen them and do a whole load of fancy stuff.
Mm. Do you have a general guideline for scissors, the angle that they would be sharpened at,
Yeah.
based on if they're cutting paper, if they're cutting hair, or if they're cutting fabric?
35 degrees. Oh, first of all, I have to tell you that we
Yeah.
do our angles differently from knife makers.
Oh.
So if they're a pair of safety scissors for children,
Hmm.
so the cutting angle is square, 90 degrees, we would call that a zero angle.
Oh. Oh.
So
Interesting.
on the charts that I have, kind of all the angles, it's all done from that right angle, which is a zero angle.
Hmm.
So, the amount of angle that you put on there, yeah, is all taken from that.
Okay.
Generally, around 25 to 35
Okay.
is what you're doing. But I have a whole list of angles. So if you're cutting through Kevlar,
Oh, wow.
I could tell you what angle you needed to sharpen them to. But then there's also an interesting kind of additional subtlety that goes on there, and that has to
Sure.
do with the toothiness of the edge. Because if you
Right.
polish the edge too much, very often what happens is that the article that you're cutting gets pushed out, slides out
Right.
from
Oh,
between the
so it
cutting.
has to have a level of grabbing,
Mm.
of a grabbing quality to it to hold. Oh, interesting.
But then not if you're doing some things. So it just depends on what you're cutting. So an over polished edge, hairdressers don't necessarily, some do, some don't like an over polished edge. They like them on the two surfaces to be polished, but on the outside they might like a toothier 360 grit.
360. Okay. That was going to be
And
my next question. What kind of
in order
grits are we
to
talking
stop
about?
hair from sliding out.
Right.
People, so very often when you're looking at commercially made scissors, even fine dressmaking scissors, you can still see the grind lines on the
Right.
outside. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That stops the fabric from slipping out.
Right.
Cut it.
Yeah. Yeah. I have, um, I've sharpened all the way from hair trimming shear or
Mhm.
scissors to garden shears for lopping up vegetables, and those ones I do keep relatively coarse because one, it's not doing a job that's super refined, but
Yeah.
two, it I guess I did have the thought that it should kind of grab the material as it's and then shear it as it's being closed.
Mm,
For some reason, I never really extended that into fabric shears or paper cutting shears or even hair
yeah.
scissors. Oh, that's
Yeah.
so interesting. And so
I spend an
for like
awful lot of time saying to people, that depends. And when
right,
people ask me, oh, what angle? That depends. How
right,
coarse? That depends.
yeah,
How much curve do you put on them? That depends.
yep. Yeah, I do the same thing and it seemed when it comes to culinary knives, a lot of people ask, "What's the angle?" And I was like, "Well, it depends on the knife and what it's designed to do. A
Yeah.
butcher cleaver is not going to be sharpened at the same angle as a sashimi knife. It's just not going to happen."
Yep.
Um, and so then for the grits for fabric or paper would be just a little coarser, or about that same 360.
Yeah, I would always start with 360 and
Uh-huh.
then or go up to something like 360 and then make a decision about whether you're wanting it finer. So
Yeah.
if it was textile scissors, if it was designed to cut silk, for
Right.
instance, which is a beta pleated protein and not an alpha helix protein, then you might have to have it slightly toothier, than slightly smoother than if you were cutting polyester lining.
Oh wow.
Then which might need to be a little bit toothier, but that's something that you need. Most people don't care. But yeah,
Mm,
I would start with 360 and see how it goes.
okay. Um, we talked about your study in diffusion welded bonds.
Yeah.
Um, and that was back in 2002, it sounded like.
Uh, yeah, yeah,
Ish.
something like
Ish.
that. Yeah, I
I,
can date it from my children. I've got 20, yeah, yeah, 20, yeah. So,
is
yeah,
is that
2002.
is that was that a published article, or is that a paper that people can read somewhere?
Yeah, but God, would
I
you don't
I would be
really?
interested. Well, and I would be curious if that was I mean, if that's a place where some of the dry welding that a lot of makers are doing these days, maybe had a stepping off point or some
Yeah,
sort of information to back up or add confidence to their
yeah.
process.
Absolutely. So, what I was doing is I was actually because I was having to weld at such low temperatures in order to
Mhm.
not melt the silver,
Right.
um, um, it was over in I was doing it in a pressurized chamber overnight,
Oh wow.
but
Like no heat?
which is a little bit weird.
Yeah. Was it the materials were heated
Oh,
up? Oh, did I lose you for a moment? Are you still there? Oh no. I don't know if I lost her or
oh,
not.
no, you're back.
I'm
I'm
back.
back. I'm
I
back.
disappeared for a second. Okay. I can't tell if there's a delay
Oh,
now.
and again. Mm.
Oh no.
Technology was doing so well.
They were. Oh my gosh. I don't know what to do in this situation. Because I feel like I've never really had this happen before. Um,
Well, I
hmm,
didn't say anything profound while you were gone, so
okay. It,
all I was saying was that
mhm,
when I was looking, so I could get it to bond quite well. I was bonding it overnight
yeah.
in a vacuum, high pressure, low temperature overnight. And the billet was joining together fine. There was no problem with that. The problem was when I was hot rolling it, and it was separating going through the hot rolling. Now, when I looked at that, it wasn't the bond that was coming apart. It was actually the silver itself was tearing apart.
Oh, wow.
Um, so the bond was really good and solid and strong. Yeah.
That's amazing.
So
Do you know of makers referencing your article?
yes. So Shining Metals,
Mm,
but
I
he
don't know.
was more of a mokume maker.
Okay,
An Australian maker called Ian Ferguson. He was
okay,
making mokume with iron and steel in his non-ferrous. So he was using it in a slightly different way.
sure.
I took it one stage further and I wanted to heat treat everything because why would you not?
Right.
Um, and there were a couple of, so my solution in the end to stop that delaminating going through the rollers was to use much thinner silver that didn't go to the edge of my billet, so
Oh,
that each of my layers, steel layers, made a protective envelope around all
yeah.
my silver layers
Oh, wow.
until it had been hot rolled, and then I could cut out my material from the center from as usual.
Right.
um, and yeah, heat treating was below the melting temperature of silver, and yeah,
Okay, so you're
everything's
just
fine.
staying essentially below the melting temperature, or
Mhm.
a much lower temperature?
Much lower.
Much lower.
Mm.
Interesting. That's so interesting. And so, I mean, I guess I can find the paper and read the paper, but I'm just so curious about this. Like, how is the silver? What is it that's creating the bond? Is because
Magic.
magic. Because I know for Damascus and diffusers, at least I think I understand, it's the atoms start to cross the
Yeah,
boundaries
so
and
you
create a
you
bond
have
there.
3 factors.
Okay.
You have pressure, time, and temperature, and
Okay.
on a lot of the, um, mokume that is done, um, and Damascus, but the mokume, for the sake of argument here,
Yeah.
um, you heat it up high, so you have a higher temperature, but it's held together lower at for a lower length of time. It's
Okay.
just playing around with those 3 parameters. I
Right.
could reduce the temperature right down because I was using high pressure. I was using hydraulic press
Right.
for hours to hold
Yeah.
the 2 materials together.
Amazing.
Um, and apparently, kind of the proof of it is that if you leave a gold coin on a block of block of lead for 100 years, just resting on its own weight, then it will bond.
Oh, wow.
It will diffusion bond those 2 metals together. You'll get that transference of atoms across that boundary.
Okay. So it's the atoms that are creating that
Yeah.
diffusion bond.
Mm,
So it doesn't matter that they're dissimilar materials, the atoms.
no, because every time I'd complain to the material scientists about me having a problem with my silver and steel bonding, they'd go, "Well, they're immiscible, like oil and water. They shouldn't bond together anyway, and it doesn't matter. If you get the parameters right, then you can join them together."
Mm, that's so crazy. I love that. That's very cool. And I love that it was happening back in the early 2000s, 22 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think to be safe and that hopefully nothing gets
Yes.
lost in the recording, we've had a great
I can't
conversation.
believe that we've been talking for over 3 hours.
Yeah, I told you it goes. It's
Ridiculous.
surprising.
Yeah,
Must have been a good conversation.
it must have been.
I know there's just so much more to talk about and so much to show and tell. But everybody should go follow Grace on Instagram. You're Grace_Horne_designs,
Yeah.
correct?
Mhm.
And then also your website is, I believe, the same. It's
Grace Horne,
gracehorn.co.uk.
co.uk. Mhm.
Yeah.
But
Um,
you get much more. My website is really just an online portfolio,
right.
and it's not even updated particularly
Okay.
enthusiastically. So, yeah, Instagram is where it's at. If you, yeah,
Yeah, and you have your, I think it's almost every Sundays.
yeah,
Often on Sundays, you have your
it is.
Sunday musings.
Mhm,
It's a
I do.
live stream where you And are you in your workshop or are you at home right now?
It depends. I'm in my studio at home at the
Okay.
moment.
Yeah.
Some Sundays I'm down in the workshop, but I'm
Right.
in my studio at home today.
Yeah, and you're sharing and talking freely, and it's cool
Yeah.
because it's I can tell that there are people who have been coming and watching quite frequently, and so there's like a community too that have been
Mm.
following and along these various days of musing and talking about scissors and knives
Yeah,
and
and it's great, and sometimes it's books, and sometimes it's interesting things
yeah,
that I've collected, and sometimes it's just random stuff that I've been working on.
yeah.
Mm.
I might have to pick your brain at a different point.
Mm.
I have some historical patterns that I'm working on recreating that are from ancient Rome that actually believe Daryl Meyer has spent some time looking at. Um, is he's still around? Is
Yeah.
he not? Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. I would love
Yeah,
to.
he's not very present because, of course, he doesn't
Sure.
get out that much, and
Right.
yeah, but he is. Yeah, he's still around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to talk to you about, I guess, kind of the idea of what it takes to potentially I don't know if it takes working with an actual researcher or archaeologist or how to work around just kind of putting together
Mm,
something that talks about the kind of rediscovering the process or
mm,
the creation of these patterns and how they were used historically and how they're potentially made historically versus modern approaches and techniques. And I have this information in my head and I don't know what to do with it. And I don't really have much use for it because they don't present well in my work. A lot of my work is asymmetrical, and a
mm.
lot of these patterns present best in a symmetrical shaped blade. Um, so, anyways,
Yeah, we should definitely have a talk, and if you do decide to do scissors, then, yeah, you need to definitely.
I want to take your class. I
That'd be great.
I need to take your class. It's a question of finding and coordinating the time. But yeah,
Mm,
I would love to take your class because again, like we were talking about before, getting that time in person with somebody is just so priceless.
yeah.
Um,
Well, it's something that I'll continue doing,
yeah,
so, just a heads up, sneaky
yeah,
heads
let's
up.
hear it.
So, I think the, um, Pacific Northwest Custom Invitational is going to be
Okay,
on the 2nd of August next year.
okay,
I hope that isn't secret news. Um, but I'll be doing, a scissor class in Portland again on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday following that.
following that would
Mhm.
be my prime opportunity.
Yeah, so the 4th, 5th, 6th, something like that.
Okay, the 4th is my son's birthday, so that might cause things to be a little tricky. Hmm. I'll have to think about it.
Mm, yeah, I'll have to
Maybe
ask
I'll
him
just have.
whether he wants his birthday a day early.
Yeah. Do you teach in over in the UK?
No, I haven't
Okay.
found facilities that means that I can do that yet. I'd
Okay.
like to, but the demand is over your side of the pond, really. And
Okay.
I'd like to do it over here, but yeah, um,
Okay.
it just means popping backwards and forwards rather a lot. I'm teaching a class down at Jason Knight's
Oh, yeah.
in October, which
Which
I'm
you
really
taught
looking
last
forward
year,
to.
didn't you?
No,
Oh,
I did Picasso. He was a student of mine last year,
okay.
but I'm actually teaching at his studio this year.
Yeah.
No, that'd be good.
I've been talking to him for a while about teaching a class out there.
Yeah.
Um, they're
No, I've
great.
not been there before, so
Mm,
that's fun. I'm looking forward to that.
absolutely.
Mm.
Well, thank you so much for all your time. You've offered so much, so many great insights and a lot of wonderful wisdom that I know that I'm actually gonna come back and listen through this because there's just so many takeaways in this conversation. But I feel like for more than anything, there's just like these. I feel like these nuggets of wisdom, especially from somebody for
So
somebody
old.
who's no, somebody who's for me, trying to make this my career rather than just a side hobby.
Mm,
There's definitely some things to take into consideration around balancing um, this work and play, I guess, in a
mm,
way to, I guess, dissuade or to fight burnout,
mm.
which is a real issue. And I think it sounds like you found some really good ways, and I'm sure you might still struggle with it from time to time. Nothing's perfect, but um,
Well, they're all
So,
strategies, aren't they?
yeah,
And I think that
strategies.
the
Yeah,
more strategies we have in our palette to deal with that,
right,
which is a real problem. I mean, it's heartbreaking, isn't it, to see somebody come and they do so well, and you
yeah,
look at them and you're 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 looking forward to seeing their progress over the year, and
right,
then boom, they drop off the
yeah,
radar, and you realize that they've just burnt themselves out, and it's just
yeah,
so sad to see.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
mm.
Well, and I also want to give a last shout out to the super sponsors, Josh Weston on Instagram. He's Josh A. Weston, as well as at Dragon Forge EXP for the Dragon Forge experience. We have Russell Tinsley of Ouzel Finch Beers. He's at Can't Make Knives at Ouzel Finch Beers, and at Nost Brewing Project, which is his project around brewing beers that are like the cheap, maybe original beers you may have had for the first time when you ever had your first beer, but made with really delicious ingredients. Then we have Dan Hubbs, who is 6'6" Mountain Knives, Maritime Knife Supply on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Maritime Knife Supply and MaritimeKnifeSupply.com. Anchorage Forge, who is Gabe Fletcher. He is at Anchorage Forge as well as at Anchorage Brewing. Tony Sasma, who is TNT Forge on Instagram, and Eric Kidwell at District 202 LLC. Grace, you've graced us with so much of your time. It's been amazing, and I can't wait to see you again at Blade Show. Again, we've been kind of acquaintances, and hopefully, I feel like this is a budding friendship that shall continue to grow over the years. And I look forward to especially bending your ear about scholarly stuff and scissor work, and eventually, hopefully, taking a class of yours sooner than later, because there's a lot to learn from you.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's
Absolutely.
been delightful to talk to you.
Yeah, you too. All right, everybody.